Good evening, I'm Gavin Jackson. Welcome to South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio's live coverage of the state's 2022 primary elections. The polls have been closed across the state, and after 1 hour, the AP has declared several winners already, including the following incumbents: Senator Tim Scott, Representative Jeff Duncan of District 3, Representative Joe Wilson of District 2, Representative Ralph Norman of District 5, and the results for the Republican governor's race are coming in as well, with Governor McMaster already being declared the winner. And right now in the Democratic governor's race, we're still waiting for results to come in, so we'll be bringing those to you throughout the night. As you can see, 4.6% of votes have been counted so far, with Congressman Joe Cunningham taking the lead over State Senator Mia McLeod. It's still very early. We have a lot to watch tonight, and we'll bring you those results over the next few hours. So again, we have reporters standing by across the state. We'll begin live reports from several different locations, including from South Carolina Public Radio's Thalicia Edie at Joe Cunningham's headquarters in Charleston, and South Carolina Public Radio's Victoria Hanson at Tom Rice's headquarters in Myrtle Beach. We'll also have coverage from Nancy Mace's headquarters in Charleston. But joining me in studio to discuss the races and what it means for the general election is Winthrop political science professor and author of the Winthrop poll, Scott Huffmon, and Gibbs Knotts, Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at the College of Charleston. So, gentlemen, welcome. It's election night again in South Carolina. Great to have you both here. Before we go to the field, I want to talk to you guys about just what we should be watching for tonight. We have some big races on the ballot, a lot of national interest as well. Gibbs, I want to start with you. Talk to me about the 1st Congressional District down in the Low Country, what we're watching for in that Republican primary.
I mean, just in the last couple of days, the CNN, the New York Times have all covered SC1, and it's a referendum on Trump. Katie Arrington, every time she talks, she says she's a Trump-endorsed conservative. Every ad, that's sort of how she begins every speech. And so, and then Nancy Mace, voted to certify the election, has really drawn the ire of former President Trump. And so, looking to see, does Trump still have sway among South Carolina's Republican voters in the 1st Congressional District? This will be a test tonight.
Yeah, Nancy Mace doing a lot of talking when it came to January 6th, but people that actually did the walking, Scott, we're talking about Tom Rice in the 7th Congressional District up the coast in Horry County, Georgetown, in the PD. Tom Rice voted to impeach President Donald Trump for the insurrection, the incitement of the insurrection. Tell us about that race, what we're watching for there. What are the factors at play?
Well, like Gibbs said, this is also a referendum on President Trump. You have Russell Fry, and his main talking point is Tom Rice was not a true Republican. He wasn't faithful to Trump when it counted. The fact that Tom Rice did vote to impeach Trump, that is almost unforgivable in Trump world. Not almost, it's literally unforgivable in Trump world. And the interesting thing, and we can talk more about this later, is both Mace and Tom Rice have Republican Party loyalty scores of 98%. I mean, they're being called rhinos, Republicans in name only. But the fact is, they're incredibly faithful when it comes to voting for Republican issues in Congress. But we're going to see a big surge of the anti-Trump sentiment, especially coming out of Horry County, the Myrtle Beach area. That has been a stronghold of Trump's. Trump has done extremely well in that area, and Tom Rice is going to have a tough time pushing back on that, and the odds are it's going to go to a runoff.
Yeah, he's running for his 6th term there in that fresh district that was created about 10 years ago because of the growth in that area. We didn't get a new congressional district this go around because of the census, but we're expecting one probably after the next census. But Scott, just sticking with that district and looking at what you've been polling recently in terms of favorability for the former president and just what that translates into when it comes to if Tom Rice could have swung this election in any way, knowing full and well how people support that former president.
Well, let me actually loop back further and talk about some polling we did of the 7th Congressional District when it was first created. What we found, first off, a little background on it. When it was created, there was the House version and the Senate version, and the Senate version actually had a slightly higher BVAP, black voting age population, which would have made it theoretically possible for a conservative black Democrat or conservative Democrat to win that district. So what happened is there was some procedural sleight of hand, and in the Senate, the House version that lowered the black voting age population was substituted, and that practically guaranteed a Republican victory in the 7th. Potentially a moderate Republican, but a Republican. And what they got was a standard run-of-the-mill business Republican, your button-up, tie suit Republican. And the polling, though, that we saw at the time, shockingly, a lot of people didn't even know they were in a new congressional district. And so that was one of the interesting things we found, is information about new districts is usually very, very low. Those are low information affairs. And so Tom Rice comes in, and a lot of these folks didn't even know they were in Tom Rice's district. So he has to build a name for himself among these folks. And he did pretty well until he runs up against Trump. And Trump right now, his favorability in our last poll among Republicans is at 89%. Essentially, 9 out of 10 Republicans in South Carolina say they hold a favorable view of Trump. And when push comes to shove in primaries, we know the most faithful voters in a party, right? The furthest right for the Republicans, the furthest left for the Democrats are the ones who turn out. That's just going to lead to, use whatever metaphor you want, uphill battle
2 hours to do it,
for Tom Rice.
Yeah, and Scott, that's interesting. There are a lot to talk about, too, when we're looking at these districts, including redistricting, especially recently. We're looking at the 1st Congressional District down there in Charleston, which is an area also growing. You know that, Gibbs. That's also the redistrict to make it even more Republican, more of a safer district. We can talk about the general later, but I want to ask you really quick before we go to Felicia, just what kind of other factors are at play when it comes to Donald Trump versus maybe Nikki Haley in this race, too?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, Nikki Haley's the most popular person in South Carolina politics probably still. I mean, Tim Scott might argue with that, but they're both really, really popular. And so, she's been down there, with Nancy Mace. They had a big rush of events over the last couple of days. And the 7th Congressional District is different than the 1st Congressional District in one sense. The first is about a +6 or so last time Trump district. Now, it did get a little bit more Republican, but it is still a swing district by most accounts. No one's calling the 7th Congressional District a swing district anymore.
We'll be watching more of that, too, as we look toward the general election. But let's head over to Joe Cunningham's headquarters and talk with Felicia Edie. Felicia, what's the mood like there? I'm sure it's pretty loud, but let us know what's going on there.
Hey, good evening, Gavin. Joe Cunningham is hoping to celebrate his victory as the Democratic nominee for governor right here at the Music Farm in downtown Charleston. Gavin, this venue is celebrating a comeback story. They closed in during the pandemic. Some thought for good, but they did reopen under new management. And in essence, that's what Joe Cunningham is hoping that he can start tonight, a comeback story. He celebrates being able to flip the congressional seat that represents his district back in 2018. But as you know, he lost his seat in 2020 to Republican Nancy Mace. And he is hoping that he is able to, he's hoping that tonight, he's hoping that he has gripped and grinned and talked policy with enough Democrats across the state to clinch the nomination and to set the stage for another flip, this time for the state's top job. As you know, it's been nearly 25 years since South Carolina has elected a governor from the Democratic Party. He seems confident that he can do it. Earlier today, he had a long, busy schedule where he met with supporters here, and he is excited and hoping that he can deliver this win for himself and also for the Democratic Party later in the year. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Felicia. Very informative, very loud as well, but I want to go over now probably to another loud spot. Before we go and talk to Victoria Hanson up in Myrtle Beach, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the governor's race, too, what we just heard from Felicia. And she mentioned how Music Farm there, that venue was closed down during COVID-19. And I think a big reason that Governor McMaster didn't have any primary challengers is because of the way he handled the COVID pandemic. What do you guys think? Do you think that was a real, he really pushed to keep things open? I think the state was only closed for about a month, but there were protests early on in April of 2020 really asking him to not shut down the state. And he doesn't have any challengers besides Trucker Bob at this point, who we already know isn't a factor since he already won the nomination. Scott, you want to take that?
Yeah, Henry McMaster just, earned the ire of, virtually every Democrat in the state, a lot of teachers, because he was pushing that narrative of we've got to get the kids back in school. We've got to get rid of the mask, but we've got to stay open for business. And that philosophy of let's keep South Carolina open for business, that really was what the Republicans wanted to hear. He was on message for everything about COVID for most of the Republicans. Let's not shut down. Let's get the schools back. Let's get rid of the masks. Let's, keep South Carolina going in the business world. And so all of that, I think, played into not having a strong opponent
opposition
in the primary.
Yeah, I mean, give or take, 18,000 South Carolinians did die over the pandemic. You can say he handled it good, bad, and different, but at the end of the day, we made it through.
Well, he handled it how the Republicans wanted him to handle it, and that we're seeing that right now.
And a lot of people moving to the state because of that as well. But now we're going to go to Myrtle Beach and check in with Victoria Hansen at Tom Rice's watch party. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Gavin, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but just bear with me. I am at Brothers Grill in North Myrtle Beach. It's not a very big place, but it certainly is a big race. Congressman Rice arrived probably about a half an hour ago. He came in, he thanked the supporters, and then he offered a prayer for the food that's being served tonight. And he basically said, God, put us in the place that you want us. Put us in the places you want us. And, this congressman has gotten a lot of national attention. He's certainly gotten the attention of former President Donald Trump when he became, or was, I should say, one of 9 House Republicans who voted to impeach the former president. And it's created some problems for him, but it also could have some benefits. We'll have to see after tonight. Let me explain a bit. First of all, it's created problems because initially there were 12 primary challengers in this race. It was whittled down to about 6 shortly after the president endorsed Russell Fry. Fry is a state house lawmaker, and he very much wants his seat, as do the other challengers tonight. They all say that Rice has basically turned his back on the district and turned his back on the former president by voting to impeach him. But the congressman hasn't wavered in what he has said. In fact, he doubled down and said, I wish looking back that I had voted to certify the election for Joe Biden. He did not. So just let me tell you a little bit about the other challengers. There is a doctor from a rural county. There's a former mayor from Myrtle Beach. Again, all wanting a chance at the seat tonight. Again, I'm at Brothers Grill in North Myrtle Beach. Oh, by the way, I did talk to a local party chairman, the party chairman for the district, on my way up here from Charleston today. And he said one thing he will be looking for, and this is to explain why I said that maybe the Trump being upset with him or angry at him is not maybe not a bad thing. As he said, he's going to look very closely at crossover votes. He's going to see where Democrats perhaps have voted in this race today, because this is an open primary. And when I was up here back in February doing a story for National Peace, there were some Democrats I spoke with. They didn't really want to go on the record or go on mic, but they just said off camera and off mic that we like Congressman Tom Rice. We think he's done a lot for this community. And on top of that, we don't care too much for the former president. So it will be a long night. It's a hot night. The door keeps opening every couple of minutes here, and it just brings in this wave of really humid, muggy air. They did have some thunderstorms earlier today, so curious, too, to see if that impacts voter turnout today. And the congressman did bring a couple of Horry County Sheriff's officers with deputies with him tonight, and they say they routinely follow him, and that might not be a bad idea. So a long night here, perhaps. We will see. The congressman is here, and we will report back throughout the night. Back to you guys, Gavin.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoria. A lot going on there, too, when you have to bring your own security detail around these days. That's politics in 2022, isn't it, Gibbs Knotts?
That's exactly right. So you have to bring your own security detail, and you also have to really know that you're getting filmed at all times. And so whatever you say, somebody's there with a camera, they're going to film it and have it up on the internet, probably before you can remember what you said. So absolutely.
Well, we're going to jump really quickly before we keep talking about these races to Nancy Mace's party headquarters right now. She's down at Patriots Point on the 18th green there at the golf course. I can imagine it's nice and warm there. I'm glad that we're here in the studio. But I want to talk to you guys about, again, Gibbs, kind of keeping with this campaign. When we look at fundraising in this race, I want to read off some numbers for you there. We saw Nikki Haley help do a huge fundraiser for Nancy Mace back right before Donald Trump came to town in Florence, and they raised about $300,000, and that was money on top of money that she's been getting from her super PAC donors going into Nancy Mace's coffers as well. So it's really interesting to see that she now has $1.4 million on hand. She did before the primary day. Katie Arrington had raised about $909,000. $525,000, I can never get those numbers right, it was her money. So she has about $606,000 on hand, too. Tell me about the fundraising aspect of this race and what that translates into for you.
I mean, Nancy Mace was up probably 4-1 in terms of what she raised compared to Katie Arrington, and so she was on the commercials more. You saw her presence more out on the internet, and so obviously incumbents have an advantage in fundraising, so it's not a super big surprise that Nancy Mace, but also some of the outside spending, Gavin, was really, really interesting in this race. I mean, different groups that were looking to support Nancy Mace. The Trump PACs were going for Katie Arrington, but most other groups on the Republican side were putting their money into the Mace campaign. And Mace is the more electable general election candidate for those folks who really want to keep SC1 in Republican hands. The fundraising shows that they're placing their bets on Nancy Mace, not Katie Arrington.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can see those numbers right there. Nancy Mace pulling in 60% right now with 6% of the votes counted, Arrington at 37.5%. Scott, I know it's super early, but do you think we can maybe have an outright win tonight in this race, or how would you gauge it at this point?
I think there's a possibility of an outright win. I mean, a lot of times you're going to end up going to a runoff if you have a whole lot of candidates splitting up the vote. And as Gibbs said, the electability is a big question for the South Carolina first, because we saw it happen last time. The most electable candidate lost in his primary, Mark Sanford, stepping on his own coattails, as he often did in the political world, usually with hiking boots. But the fact is that Katie Arrington then got the nomination and lost. And as Gibbs said, a lot of people are banking on Nancy Mace being able to keep that a Republican district. And the money flowing to her PACs, those are also a lot of external money. These are the people who know how she voted and how she behaved in Congress, who want to keep her there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're getting a live shot there of Nancy Mace at her event. Like I said, there at Patriots Point Golf Course. And so far, so good for Nancy Mace, the incumbent there. She's running for her second term. We also have a full page of graphics we want to bring you right now in terms of who has already won their races in South Carolina. A lot of them unopposed races that we can talk about. Again, we're also waiting to see more results come in for these races, like the governor. We know that incumbent Governor Henry McMaster has already got the nomination, but we're watching this race here for the Democrats with Joe Cunningham, about 60% right now, really pulling strong over State Senator Mia McLeod at 28% with 10.6% of the votes counted. And we have some more to look at, of course. That 7th Congressional District race with State Representative Russell Fry right now at 45% and Tom Rice, the incumbent congressman, at 30%. Some numbers that people are really feeling that's what that race is going to be looking like. Again, you need 50% plus one vote to make sure that there's not a runoff on June 28th for this race. But there are a lot of people in that race. There's 7 candidates. Pretty much a foregone conclusion, Gibbs, that we're going to go into a runoff there?
It's really hard, just as Scott was saying, it's really hard with 7 candidates to get 50.1% of the vote, especially when you've got people that have raised a lot of money, like Russell Fry and Tom Rice. You've got an incumbent, and so I'd be surprised if we don't see a runoff in the 7th, which will mean 2 more weeks of campaign ads, a lot more spending, a lot more fundraising. So if you like politics, you'll be excited about that. If you don't like politics, you got 2 more weeks to hear from the 2 leading candidates in SC7.
Yeah, especially when you look at what Tom Rice has on hand right now. He has $1.3 million on hand. And, Scott, you were just talking about Mark Sanford not being able to get out of his own way. And when he lost in 2018, he had about $1 million in the bank, too, that he could have used. So I'm guessing we're going to see just an all-out blitz, maybe blimps, maybe planes flying around with Tom Rice. Different things. What do you think we're going to see him do over the next 2 weeks if he's in a runoff?
Well, remember, this is Horry County, so we're Myrtle Beach. They're not going to be blimps. They're going to be planes towing the streamers that you're going to see on the beach. There's no reason to leave any money on the table. You saw what happened with Mark Sanford. So Tom Rice knows that he has to get the demographic who is most against him. So the majority of people, if he goes to a runoff, will have voted against him. And the only people who can vote in a runoff are the ones who voted in the primary, the original primary election. So he was going for the kind of more moderate Republicans, the ones who he hoped would vote but are actually less likely to turn out than the most passionate, the Trumpiest of the voters. And so he's going to have to get some conversions. He's going to have to convert the non-Fry voters if he wants to then take the runoff, but he's got the money to do it.
Mm-hmm. We'll go back to the 7th Congressional in a moment, but we have Thalisha Edie at Joe Cunningham's headquarters with an interview for us. Hey there, Thalisha. think we just lost that. Let's see. We do have some superintendent of education numbers we can talk to before we get back to Thalisha. Right now we're looking to see who's going to replace Superintendent of Education Molly Spearman. Kathy Manis right there in the lead with 34.3% of the vote. Ellen Weaver at 21% of the vote. And Betson there at 13.9%. Interesting race here is another statewide constitutional officer race, a very competitive one on both sides of the aisle. Kathy Manis is also, she's someone that the Republicans who are moderate want to see replace Superintendent Spearman, who herself is very moderate. And then, of course, when you look at Ellen Weaver and her backing. Scott, I don't know if you want to jump into that race, if you've been following what's going on there.
This is really two different philosophies about education within the Republican Party. And a lot of the more libertarian-leaning Republicans have never really felt happy about public education. They are the ones who want school choice. And so in Ellen Weaver, they have a candidate. She was partially homeschooled. She did graduate from a public high school, but she was homeschooled for part of it. She then went to Bob Jones University. She doesn't have her master's, but she supposedly will have it if she takes office. That's a requirement for that office. But you also then have a candidate who says that they are very pro-public education. So you have these two clashes of ideologies within the Republican Party. What has been ascendant, of course, is scraping away at public funding for education. We've actually seen that in school board races around the state, well, frankly, around the country. That's one of the things that the Republican Party has been doing over the last decade to build experienced candidates. They have been running candidates for school board and then building on that experience. And as they got a lot of these extremely conservative candidates on school boards, we see it coming to fruition now with the critical race theory, brouhaha and all of that. But the fact is, they've been getting candidates onto school boards who are pro-school choice, who are looking to funnel money away from the public schools and to schools of choice. And that's what we have between Manis and Weaver.
And Gibbs, I want to talk to you about some of those provisional questions on the ballot, advisory questions on the Republican ballot, one of which was talking about partisan school board elections. But I wanted to get to Thalisha right now at Joe Cunningham's headquarters, where she has an interview for us. Hey, Thalisha.
Hey, Gavin, we're live at Music Farm in downtown Charleston. Standing with me is Trevor Maloney. He is the campaign manager for the Cunningham campaign. Trevor, thank you so much for your time this evening. I wanted to ask you this question. Earlier today, NPR published an article stating that our gubernatorial candidates are focusing more on the issues that mean more to voters, the blue voters in the state. If successful tonight, how is the Cunningham campaign going to carry that message, but also appeal to all residents in this deep red state?
Well, I disagree with the characterization. Joe has been campaigning on raising teacher pay, fixing our roads and bridges, and doing something about the crime problem here in South Carolina. We've been campaigning on these issues for over a year now. We're not just talking to Democrats, we're talking to independents and Republicans. These aren't partisan issues. When Joe was in Congress, he made sure that he put his congressional district, the Low Country, above politics and above party. So we're going to carry the same message statewide. Let's raise the wages for teachers. Let's pay them more. Let's finally fix our roads and bridges. And let's do something about this high crime problem.
It's been nearly 25 years since our state has elected a governor from the Democratic Party, running on issues very similar to these. Any concern at all that you might have to change the messaging after tonight?
No, I think, we feel confident that Joe's going to get through this primary. The general election, we will have one of the starkest differences and contrasts that we've had in generations between a governor that's stuck in the past and between Joe, who has a real exciting vision for the future. And that contrast hasn't been presented to voters in decades. So we feel pretty confident about the general election message.
Trevor, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. All right, Gavin, we're live at Music Farm in downtown Charleston, where you can hear the live music and the supporters waiting for Joe Cunningham. He's expected to address the crowd pretty soon. Also with him, Dr. Annie Andrews, a local pediatrician who is running to win Cunningham's former congressional seat. Back to you.
Thanks, Felicia. Alicia. Very exciting atmosphere down there. Gibbs, we're going to have another interview with Victoria in just a moment, but I want to ask you for about a minute or so, talk to us about that SCO1 race that you just heard Alicia reference to, Dr. Andy Andrews, who's going to be down there with Joe. She's the only Democrat in that race for SCO1, and she'll be facing whoever wins this race between Nancy Mace and Katie Arrington. What's her story? How much of a future, how big of a shot does she have in that?
So no experience in politics, but she's a dream candidate in a lot of ways for Democrats. She's a pediatrician. She works at MUSC. She's been really active in violence and gun violence against children, and so a big believer in science. So I had her on campus at College of Charleston, spoke to her as part of our Bully Pulpit series, and she was really, really impressive. And so I think she's going to be able to raise a lot of money. I think she's going to be able to do well in debates. But it's still an uphill battle for Democrats, especially after that redistricting. But the Democrats really couldn't ask for a better candidate than Andy Andrews. Yeah,
pretty pragmatic approach to that race when we're going to see a lot of passion, a lot of energy on the campaign trail in the 1st Congressional District. I also want to talk to you, Gibbs, about what we heard Felicia asking Joe's campaign manager there, too, about what it takes to win as a Democrat statewide in this state, which you haven't done in 25 years if you're governor. We heard Senator Mia McLeod attacking Joe, talking about, being Republican light. Right. Is that a fair description, or can you just call someone moderate in this state to try and get cross voters?
I still think being a moderate voter. Yeah, sorry. I think being moderate is going to give the Democrats the best chance. I think being able to win. Yeah.
We're going to go back to that, but we had Tom Rice on the line with Victoria Hanson over there in Myrtle Beach. We love to hear from our incumbents and anyone who's running for the race right now. So let's go to this interview with Victoria.
Again, I'm having trouble hearing you guys, so I apologize if there's a delay here, but I just got Congressman Rice to join us. He got here, like I said, probably about an hour ago now, and you got quite a crowd here at Brothers Grill. I mean,
it's great to see all the support. A lot of these people have been with me since I got into politics 12 years ago, and it means a lot for everybody to show up and give us this round of applause and be here with us.
And in your prayer today, as you blessed the food as you arrived, you said, God, put us where you want us. What were you trying to say there?
I pray every day, multiple times a day, for God to put me where he needs me and use me as a tool to lift all those people. And I'm so proud of how far we've come in these last 10 years. I'm so proud of how many people have been lifted out of poverty and gotten a job, and how many people are pursuing the American dream as a result of our effort.
When I talked to you, I guess has it been February already? It's been a minute. We talked a lot about what happened on January 6th. I asked you even then, do you regret what you did voting to impeach? And you said no. In fact, you doubled down a bit.
Absolutely not. I know I did the right thing. I know, and I wouldn't change one single thing.
And you told me at the time, if voters in this district think what happened is okay, maybe I'm not their man.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, the way I look at it, January 6th was a huge violation of the Constitution. The president tried to usurp the Congress, and our Constitution is the source of our freedom and prosperity. And that was bequeathed to me by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and I want to bequeath that on to our children and grandchildren. It's too important. Allegiance to the Constitution is far more important than allegiance to any man.
And finally, I know you were making the rounds today, kind of talking to voters. And what are you hearing from folks? What are they telling you today?
Oh, certainly I angered some folks. But for every person that says something negative, 10 people say thank you. So I'm again, very happy with where I am. Win, lose, or draw.
When I came back here in February, I talked to some voters who are Democrats who quietly said, you know what? I'm going to vote in this race. Are you hopeful that you might get some crossover votes tonight?
I represent everybody. And I think I've gotten crossover votes in every election I've ever done. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and best of luck with the race, and we'll be here watching. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
All right, Congressman Tom Rice. Again, we're at, oh, sorry, sir. Just bumped right into him. We're at Brothers Grill. Again, not a very big place. And we do have a couple sheriff's deputies at the door making sure that everything's okay and that everybody is safe. But Congressman Rice, waiting for the results. In fact, he said, have you heard anything? Have you seen any numbers yet? And I said, no, sir, I haven't. I just kind of want to ask you about what you're feeling right now in this moment before those numbers come in and before this race is decided if it doesn't go to a runoff. Back to you guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Victoria. And I like what they have on in the background there on the TV screens. I don't know if that was on purpose that they put ETV on, but we love it. Love that support. Scott, I want to talk to you about what we just heard from the congressman, though. He's been saying the same thing. He's been on message since after that vote. I spoke with him January 14th about that vote. He had just landed in Myrtle Beach. He had already been getting as much heat as he could possibly take, and he still has been doing that for a year and a half now. Is it more of a legacy vote at this point, where it's just like, this was the right thing I needed to do at the time? It's going to age well. We're going to go past this phase of politics in America, and in the history books, I'll be a hero in a sense?
Well, it will age well. I mean, in the history books, that will be the right vote. He had some great lines there, and you're right. He's been on message the entire time. You know, you follow the Constitution, not any single person. I will take a little bit of an issue with him saying it was bequeathed from, you know, Washington and Jefferson. I graduated from James Madison University. It was Madison who's the father of the Constitution. So I had to toss that in there.
Here we go.
But he is, he has not backed away from it.
Yeah.
This is something that everybody said, oh, you're going to have to apologize. You're going to have to kiss the ring, or you have absolutely no chance. And so he's really running as, I believed in this. I believe it's the right thing. I'm a man who stands on principles, and he's got to hope there are enough folks in the Republican Party who remembered traditional Republican values, traditional conservative values, as opposed to, you know, being simply fans of Trump, who show up and vote and at least get him into the runoff, which I think we're going to see.
Mm-hmm. And Gibbs, really quick before we get some more statewide numbers, I want to just piggyback on what you heard from that interview with Congressman Rice, especially when we look at him being one of the first to vote to impeach the president, and what this might bode for others, the 9 others who are running.
Yeah, I mean, you always have to take into account the district characteristics, a number of other people in the race. All those things can factor in. But in a conservative, solidly Republican district, it's very, very difficult to take a vote against President Trump, especially in a place like South Carolina, where he remains as popular as he is among Republican voters. Mm-hmm.
Especially in a primary election like we're looking at. Well, let's get some new numbers up here. Again, it's still super early. We're looking at numbers from scvotes.org. That's where you can find the latest, and that's what we're looking at. And right now, for the South Carolina gubernatorial Democratic race, Joe Cunningham, former congressman there, is at 58.1%. State Senator Mia McLeod of Richland County is at 30%, and 16% of the votes are being counted. Right now, when we look at the U.S. Senate race, we're looking at State Representative Crystal Matthews polling there at 35%. So again, a pretty crowded field that she's competing against there. Catherine Fleming Bruce is at 33.6%, and Angela Getter is right there at 31.4%. So probably easy to say a runoff is in the cards for that race. The 1st Congressional District with Nancy Mace polling at 56% right now, and former 1st Congressional District Republican nominee Katie Arrington at 41%, 13% of the votes counted there. So still very early. No one's calling these races yet. And we were just talking to Congressman Tom Rice. We're seeing those numbers tick down, of course, with State Representative Russell Fry now at 45%, and the incumbent Tom Rice at 28%. Some numbers that we're very consistent about what we're all projecting for tonight. But again, you have to get to 50% plus 1 vote to avoid a runoff on June 28th. So a lot to be watching there. But I want to go back to what we were talking about before we went to those interviews, and that's about this concept of being a moderate Democrat in South Carolina in order to win. Gibbs, kind of pick up on what we were talking about there and what it's going to take for a Democrat to even have a shot at a statewide election. I mean, you look back to the 2020 race with Jamie Harrison and Lindsey Graham, and the millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars that was spent, and he still lost by 10 percentage points.
Yeah, I mean, if you think that Democrats are going to have it easy, you don't have to look very much back into that race to see how difficult it is. And so, I think of it like a 100-yard dash, and Republicans a lot of times are starting out at the 10, 15, 20-yard. They start out ahead in South Carolina politics, and so it's really going to take a perfect race by a Democrat, It's going to take probably some mistakes by the Republicans, but it can happen. I mean, there's a Democratic governor in Kentucky. There's a Democratic governor in Louisiana. There's even a Democratic governor right next door in North Carolina. And so a state like ours can elect a Democrat, but it's been a while for a Democratic governor, and it's been a while for any statewide candidate to get elected as a Democrat. And so it's just an uphill battle in this state right now.
Scott, with that being the case, why wouldn't Democrats just focus on having, say, one candidate like we have in the 1st Congressional District with Annie Andrews, who's going to challenge whoever wins this race against Katie Arrington and Nancy Mace, instead of 5 candidates running for the Democratic gubernatorial nomination, just similar to what we saw in 2018? Why not find one candidate to focus their fire on incumbent Governor Henry McMaster?
Well, you know, one of the things is when you only have one candidate in the primaries, that usually means you have a weak bench. So it's often a sign of the strength of the party to have a whole lot of candidates entering the race. And one of the other things it speaks to is the nature of the party. There are wings within the party. And I think Gibbs is pointing out something really important here. We are not Georgia. Georgia is much closer to being able to win, or at least get a Democrat almost winning the governor's race by turnout among Democrats alone. And for that, you might run a little further to the left. That's the Stacey Abrams model. But here, when Republicans start off, as you said, the 10-yard line, there is a plus 10 percentage point advantage to Republicans in any race. We saw that with Jamie Harrison. And Jamie Harrison really ran on the turnout model. I'm going to turn out Democrats, hardcore traditional Democrats. Even if I alienate some slightly conservative folks, I can win on turnout, and he lost by the standard 10%. So the strategically running as a moderate is what the Democratic Party, they're putting their eggs in that basket for this election, and that's why, you know, you saw the party basically pushing Cunningham, and Mia McLeod had a hard time getting that debate, and that wasn't an easy thing. And you know, a lot of people were calling foul, but the fact is, we're not North Carolina and we're not Georgia. It takes a different strategy here. And Jamie Harrison, who was as good a Democratic candidate as you're going to see, ran as a slightly left Democratic candidate, lost by 10. So they're looking for a new strategy.
Yeah, there's a lot at play there when it comes to the state Democratic Party, of course. And yes, it was not an easy lift to get that debate off the ground, but we did it. We did it 3 days ago, so we're happy that we got that chance. We can talk about what we heard during the debate as well, but we need to also talk about some of that fundraising in that race, too, for governor. I want to just mention really quickly that Joe Cunningham had $322,000 going on into the primary ahead of this race here, and then Mia McLeod had $67,000 on hand. So a really kind of a different strategy there, too. You know, Joe was able to go up on air in some of the big markets across the state. Do we think that that's going to make a key difference tonight, Gibbs? Absolutely.
I mean, certainly money doesn't win elections, but it really helps. It helps you. It helps you run commercials. It helps you get your name out. It helps you have assemble a great team around you. And so, you know, I think Joe Cunningham not only has a big fundraising advantage, you know, he's been running for a while and he's been able to get to all 46 counties. And so he's definitely been able to have the name recognition in a way that the other candidates have not been able to do quite as much of.
And Scott, I don't know if you watched the debate or not. I'm sure you did, right? Everyone did at home. But I want to get your thoughts on just maybe what we heard, maybe what we didn't hear in that debate. I think a lot of people were expecting a pretty spicy debate there, just based on what we saw playing out on social media the week leading up to that debate. It was very tame. That's okay. We can have civil debate. That's what it's there for. But anything that you saw maybe in the coverage or the debate itself that stood out in terms of helping differentiate these candidates?
Well, I think the most important thing is we now know we want a debate between Mia McLeod and Todd Rutherford, the Democratic minority leader in the State House, and that was perhaps the most exciting Twitter exchanges that we've seen. So that was where all the spice was. You know, the debate itself was pretty bland. Nobody was expecting that. Everybody was expecting fireworks. And I think you have to give Mia McLeod credit for that. Folks assumed she was going to come in throw grenades and make herself look desperate, as this is the only way I can take out a clear front runner. And the fact is she didn't do that. And I think that speaks to her campaign and to her as a candidate. But you're right. I think the turmoil we saw around the debate, even though we didn't see the fireworks in the debate, the turmoil we saw around the debate speaks heavily to the infighting within the party, just as some of the race, and we talked about the superintendent of education race, speaks to the infighting within the Republican Party. I think this speaks strongly to the infighting within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, Gibbs, anything you want to build off of that, what we saw during that debate, maybe what we didn't see during the debate?
Yeah, I think, Henry McMaster took a lot of incoming, and that's good for Democrats. And so, certainly, Mia McLeod, Joe Cunningham both really took some shots at Henry McMaster. And, they didn't have a lot of differences on policy. And so sometimes when there's not a lot of policy differences, debates can turn pretty personal. This one didn't, and I think that was probably a good thing for Democrats long term. I was glad you guys did it, and to be able to pull it together so quickly, it was great to see. And it was a good opportunity for voters to see the candidates, and especially those candidates who haven't had a chance to be on the air quite as much. That's one of the big advantages of debates for them.
Yeah, but Scott, just looking back at that Twitter war, and we're filling time, we're talking about what's surrounding this debate, but, House Minority Leader Todd Rutherford endorsed Joe Cunningham that week, and, Mia, Senator McLeod really went after Todd for a lot of personal things that are just really not involved in this race. How surprising is it for you to see such a personal attack take place in modern day politics? I couldn't even think of a recent event in the state.
Are you kidding?
Oh, I'm talking about in this state at that level. I mean, of course we could talk about, a lot of different things. We can use examples, but to get that personal, that wasn't in the arena, essentially.
Well, I think we have seen some pretty vicious personal politics in the past. I mean, everybody remembers Gibbs Knotts and his comments about, Nikki Haley, which and hopefully no one will ever repeat. I mean, we get the cliches in South Carolina, blood sport politics, bare knuckle politics, and we get them for a reason, because they can be. And the interscene violence, the violence within the parties can be awfully vicious at times. And I think we saw that bubbling to the surface. And I know Todd. I've met him several times. We're both Liberty Fellows, and he is always ready and willing to fire off those slings and arrows if he thinks it's going to advance the Democratic agenda. And he stands for that sort of more traditional part of the Democratic Party, the more, kind of functioning within the rules, by the rules, using the rules, subverting them if he has to, but darn well knowing them. And I think Mia has been more of a firebrand, and I think that has caused them to clash in the past. And in South Carolina, as Gibbs said, when you don't have as much policy difference, then things can get personal. And I think we saw that happening, and it was fun to watch. I mean, I hate to say that. It's, whenever people get into these Twitter wars,
the dirty laundry comes out.
Absolutely. It's a peek behind the curtains, and I hate to say it, as political scientists, we often are looking at things from a 50,000-foot view, and things like this allow us to peek behind the curtains and see the individuals who are participating in the grand movements that we study, and we look for explanation, we look for causality, and as a social science we tend to find it, but we know there are individual people back there, and it can be a fun thing to really look behind that curtain and step inside the sausage factory for a day.
Yeah, even if no one wins, right, Gibbs?
That's right. I mean, no one wants, yeah, right, exactly. No one wants to get not get an endorsement. I'm sure she would have liked to have gotten an endorsement from a fellow state senator. But, obviously when he did the endorsement at Cunningham, he really went after McLeod, and then he went after her on policy issues, and sort of some of the sort of way she operates as a legislator, and then it just went really downhill from there. And so, I'm glad that seems to have stopped at least a little bit, and we didn't see it come up in the debate at all. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, I was interested. I wanted to kind of know about more governance styles too, and how they would use that bully pulpit. But I think we got a glimpse of how at least Senator McLeod would use her bully pulpit. Very reminiscent of maybe Nikki Haley's use of Twitter and social media back when she was in the governor's office. Always stirring things up there
Oh
too.
yeah, well, her classic "bless your heart" tweet at Trump. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to forget that. She is strategic in her use of social media, and I think we're going to start seeing that again as she, let's face it, starts running for president.
A lot to talk about. You heard it here first. Surprise. Actually, let's look at some state superintendent of education numbers really quick as these results continue to come in throughout the night. Again, still very early. These numbers are still very fresh and flexible. We're looking at Kathy Manis there at 34.6%, Ellen Weaver at 21.1%, and let's see, Brian Chapman there at 13.6%. Still very early. These are very early tabulations. And then if we flip on over to the Democratic state superintendent education race there, we have Lisa Ellis at 45.7%, Gary Burgess at 31.3%, and State Representative Jerry Govan at 23%. Let's talk about education some more too, and just look at what's going on, what's at play right there too. I was wondering if it was more advantageous for some Democrats to vote in the Republican primary at this point. And you can make that case. We could talk about that in the 7th congressional race as well. But you know, when it comes down to it, it's a very uphill battle. Another metaphor we can keep using when it comes to winning statewide as a Republican. But when you're trying to maybe go against a more further right, candidate like we're talking about Ellen Weaver versus Kathy Manis, is it more advantageous for these Democrats to maybe vote in the Republican primary, Gibbs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of times the Democrats are going to be more sympathetic to that person who's a little bit more moderate. I think there's some thought, and this concerns some people who want party registration before you vote, and that was one of the questions on the Republican ballot today. Is there that fear that some Democrats going to go in mischievously and support the more right-wing candidate to give their Democrat a better chance? I don't see a lot of evidence of that. I think people tend to kind of vote for the candidate they'd most like to see in office. But I think I'm for open primaries. I like the system that we have, but I do think that in South Carolina, it's tempting.
I'm got to cut you off. Joe Cunningham's talking.
Let's go. I don't want to
keep
absolutely, yeah.
Can I have Gibbs?
Before my 4 brothers do, because the Cunningham brothers are in full effect tonight. We have all 5 of them in the house. Put your hand down, Josh. Hey, right now, though, I want to introduce to you a dear friend of mine and somebody that I've known for a while, and more importantly, it's somebody that my son Boone has known for a while, and it's somebody that puts our kids ahead of every single thing else. This is a person who not only talks with words, but she talks with actions, and the things that she's fighting for are the things that we hold dear to all of our hearts. Protecting our children, making sure guns don't fall into the hands of those who should not have guns, making sure that we all can feel safe and feel good about sending our kids out the door into school, to church, or to a mall or to a movie without the threat of gun violence. Somebody who's been on the front lines, been fighting this battle for years and years and years. Somebody who is going to be the next Congresswoman for South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and my privilege to introduce to you your next Congresswoman, Dr. Annie Andrews.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see so many friends out here, so many motivated Democrats who are ready to get the governor's mansion and get this 1st congressional seat back. So thank you all for being here. So as my good friend Joe said, I am Dr. Annie Andrews. I am your Democratic nominee for South Carolina's 1st Congressional District, and I am ready to get Nancy Mace that job she wants on Fox News. So I am a pediatrician and a mom of 3 kids, and never in 1 million years did I think I would be sharing a stage with the spin doctors. But like Joe said, I am here for our kids. I am here for my kids and your grandkids, because right now, our representative is not fighting for your kids. So if you are ready for a representative who believes climate science is real, I'm your girl. And if you are ready for a representative who believes a woman should have the right to make her own healthcare decisions, I'm your girl. And if you believe our children's safety is more important than what the NRA thinks, I am your girl. So no matter what happens tonight, everyone's asking me if I want Mace or Arrington to win. It doesn't matter. They have the same values. They both love Donald Trump. They don't believe in climate science. They are anti-choice, pro-gun, extreme candidates, and that is not what the Low Country needs. So I am incredibly privileged and honored to share this stage with Joe tonight. Joe taught us that we can win this seat, and that is exactly what we are going to do on November 8th, 2022. So I have been working as hard as I can to put us in a position to win this race. We launched our campaign in November. Just this weekend, we have raised over $1 million. So we are ready to beat whoever our extreme opponent is. I'm going to need all of your support to get there. So please go to my website, drannieandrews.com, and take a look. Give us a donation and sign up to volunteer, because it is going to take every single one of us to get this seat back. And the stakes this cycle could not be higher. If we do not get this seat back, we will go backwards on climate change, backwards on voting rights, backwards on women's rights, and backwards on gun violence. And our children deserve better than that. So I'm going to make a bad spin doctor's joke. I know that I am not the doctor you all came to see tonight. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it back over. Thank you all for being here, and let's go win this thing.
That was Dr. Annie Andrews. She's the Democratic nominee for the 1st Congressional District. She'll be facing off against either Nancy Mace or Katie Arrington, whoever wins that nomination for the Republican Party tonight. Gibbs, we just heard Dr. Andrews speaking there, and a big thing that jumped out to us, and she was asked, who would I prefer win this nomination on the Republican side? She said it doesn't matter, they have the same values. Should she care who wins this race tonight?
So Gavin, that's a great question. They're both very conservative. They are both, they both are diehard dyed-in-the-wool Republicans. But Katie Arrington is who they should hope to run against. I mean, Katie Arrington lost to Joe Cunningham before, and Katie Arrington, given how much she's connected to Trump in this swing moderate type of district, I think is a better draw for the Democrats. I mean, obviously, it looks like it's probably going to be Nancy Mace. There's still a lot of votes to be counted, and so we don't want to make any calls. But if I were Annie Andrews, I'd rather vote against Katie Arrington, because she's lost it before, and Nancy Mace has won it before, and Nancy Mace is able to get some of those crossover voters that Katie Arrington I don't think is going to be as competitive with.
And Scott, that's something that we've heard Nancy Mace really just drilling in on Katie Arrington, but as that, she's lost this district before in 2018 to Joe Cunningham, very narrowly, but she lost it.
Right, and and that is something that you can point out is one candidate has lost this district before, and one candidate has won this district before, and the Charleston is a very different place than Greenville. All right. And so the type of conservatives that are in the Low Country are not necessarily going to be as super Trump as some of the Republicans that you're going to see in the upstate. So, that's why having the super Trump candidate is not necessarily the boon that it is when you're running in the 1st Congressional District that it is and you're running in any of the other Republican districts. So, again, not saying that, Katie Arrington's not a good candidate, but the 1st District is not necessarily the place where her message is finding the most fertile ground in South Carolina.
Yeah, I'd almost be interested to hear her in the 7th Congressional District versus Russell Fry, who's been a little bit more toned down versus, Katie Arrington there. But I think that's also a matter of just him not really having to do that much, because he's the guy who's Trump endorsed and he's run against Tom Rice. So we're voting for that guy, essentially, if that's how you feel.
That's right. And again, just as Scott said, the 7th Congressional District is just a different district. There's a lot. It's more conservative. There are more Republicans. And so it opens the door for somebody like Russell Fry, a little bit more for Katie Arrington. And Katie Arrington, too, she's also been scrutinized, the whole security clearance thing, and she's running against a on-message, well-financed, opponent in Nancy Mace, who has some really big backers, including none other than Governor Nikki Haley down there campaigning for her. And she's certainly been able to turn out a good number of people and appeared with her. And, you know, having those two standing together, I think has really helped Nancy Mace, especially make a last minute push over this last week or so.
Very interesting. Yeah, especially because we haven't seen Donald Trump come back to the district since March when he was first here. But I want to just talk about some numbers we've been seeing coming in, get some statewide races and who's already won their nominations tonight and maybe who hasn't. You have to even face anyone in November, essentially, right now. But let's get a little update first, I guess, about the first congressional district race that we were just talking about with Nancy Mace. About 54% of the vote and Katie Arrington at 44%. Again, still very early, with 16% of those precincts reporting in that Republican race. Let's switch on over and see some other numbers. We've got the 7th congressional district race right there with State Representative Russell Fry at 46%. And incumbent Representative Tom Rice at 26%. Again, numbers that have been really holding strong, even as 22.6% of the votes have been counted in that race. And as we look at the governor's race as well, between Joe Cunningham and Mia McLeod, Cunningham holding strong right there at 55%, State Senator Mia McLeod at 31%. And we also have some big news, but not surprising news. We got his 6th district Democrat, Jim Clyburn, winning the nomination for his 16th term, and he's the number 3 Democrat there up in the House. Very interesting to see him being challenged, Scott. You know, it's not the time essentially for him to be challenged. I think a lot of people are waiting for him to bow out or whatever may happen, but it's Jim Clyburn's place essentially. When he wants to be done, he'll be done. So. What's the strategy there if you're running against Jim Clyburn?
Yeah, it's been Jim Clyburn's seat for as long as he's wanted it, and as long as Joe Biden is still president, he should keep it because he's got those chips. Joe Biden almost assuredly wouldn't be president, or it would have been much harder for him to be president without that endorsement from Jim Clyburn that really took him from near falling out to winning South Carolina. And once he won South Carolina, that was the springboard he needed in order to sort of come forward and become president. So Jim Clyburn still has a lot of chips that he needs to cash in. So why are folks running against him? I think the main reason would be name recognition. You want to run in this district if you want to set yourself up to be the person when Jim Clyburn steps down. So Jim Clyburn will step down. Everybody expects that he will, you know, hand pick a successor, but you know, that person is not going to be Jim Clyburn. They're not going to automatically be able to keep the seat in the way that Jim Clyburn has proven again and again that he can. So if you want to run in that district, whenever Jim Clyburn decides that it's time for him to retire, you're going to need to build some name recognition. You're going to need to become a more experienced candidate. And I think that folks are running not necessarily for this race, but they're running for the future races in the 6th congressional district.
And that will be quite the race whenever he's not on the ballot, of course. I mean, and even if you're trying to get that name recognition, I have a feeling we'll have some really big names in that race too. Gibbs, that's a huge district, talking about the 6th congressional district. It goes from Columbia down 26 through Orangeburg, touches into Charleston too, has Joint Base Charleston there. Right. That's been was a really interesting process to watch when it came to redistricting as well.
Yeah, I mean, parts of the Charleston Peninsula, certainly North Charleston, the Park Circle area, all part of the 6th congressional district. But yeah, I'm really interested to see when Clyburn finally decides he's finished. You know, everybody from Bakari Sellers to Steve Benjamin to Jim Clyburn's daughter. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been waiting a long time for that seat to come open. And so, you know, I think it'll be extremely competitive. You know, it is the one safe Democratic seat in the state. Obviously, SC1 is fairly competitive, but you know, if you're a Democrat, you don't have a lot of opportunities in the state. That's one of them, and so there probably are there is a long list of people waiting to jump into that race.
Yeah, and he's definitely getting his due in terms of what you're talking about, Scott, in terms of him helping Joe Biden get to the White House. We heard Vice President Kamala Harris, who was in town in Columbia on Friday, talking about how consequential he was in that race. And you know, that's why when she walked off stage, she walked off and gave Jim Clyburn a big hug. So those are one of those things that we get to see done, and we almost saw play out in that Supreme Court race as well. But before we keep talking about the 6th congressional, I want to jump to Victoria Hanson, who's at Tom Rice's headquarters in Myrtle Beach. Hey, Victoria.
Hey guys, I've only seen a couple numbers come in. This is not a great place to watch results, and I'm certainly not going to call election results here or even kind of weigh in on them. But I will say that there is a subdued vibe here. We spoke with Congressman Tom Rice just a couple of moments ago, and you may have noticed that in him, a little bit reflective. And I remember meeting with him at his home a couple months ago. It was that same kind of tone, reflective, looking back at his accomplishments and things that he's done, and again, no regrets. And perhaps I haven't stressed enough the anger that I sensed and felt when I've been out here reporting in the past, especially in Florence when former President Trump came down and held that huge rally where he again endorsed the challenger in this race, one of the challengers in this race, I should say, Russell Fry, a state representative. And people there, if you talk to them, they're very, very angry. They feel like they've been betrayed, that this is a congressman who's represented them for a long time, but that one vote, they thought should cost him his job. The night is still early. We shall see. Congressman is back there mingling with people. He's spending time to talk to people and have some conversations, because when I went to try to get him earlier to come back and say, hey, can you talk to us now, tapped him on the shoulder, he wasn't interrupting the conversation to come be on TV. He was taking time to really speak with people. So, again, tough place to watch the results come back. I'll let you guys do that back there and talk about results there. But the vibe is pretty subdued here. It is crowded. It is a small place. And, it's kind of changed. As the door opens now, before it was like this wave of heat coming in, it kind of feels good because it's gotten that crowded. So that's the latest here from Brothers Grill. I'm in North Myrtle Beach with the Camp for Tom Rice, watching the results with them come in. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Victoria, for that. I'm just looking at the numbers, too, like she's mentioning. You have Russell Fry right now at 45%, Tom Rice at 24%, but Barbara Arthur at 18%. She's running on a very anti-communist, very pro-Trump, America First type platform, and really kind of coming in out of left field in many ways. But, this is kind of going to be the situation here, Scott, where we look at these results that are going to obviously lead to a runoff election, too. Do you think that maybe Tom Rice is subdued because he thinks he's going to go into a runoff, or is he even going to at this point when we look at an 18% versus a 24%, talking about 6 points right there, and that maybe he's not in the top two to go in a runoff on June 28th?
Well, the odds are if there's going to be a runoff, he will be. The interesting thing will be that 18%. There would be a lot of people that said if they hadn't been in the race, it would have been Russell Fry's to win, and he would have topped 50%. And the truth is, given their message is so similar, the pro-Trump message, there's a little bit of truth to that. We saw when I think of the 18%. I think of the George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton race, and we all know that his years
Ross Perot
got 18%, and that was claimed that's what kept H.W. Bush from becoming president again. So I think that we will hear and see about those voters, because the truth is Tom Rice is going to have to reap some voters from a place where he is unable to sow many seeds, and those are the kind of voters who were absolutely set voting against him and voting for the Trump message, and that's going to be tough.
Yeah, and that's something, Gibbs, we talk about this growth in the state. We talk about millions of people moving here over the past 2 decades, and the growth not only down in Charleston, where you're at, but also on the Grand Strand, Myrtle Beach. Just looking at those people who are moving to the state, what can we deduce from their ideologies? A lot of them are coming from the north, so I think a lot of people have assumptions about people from the north. I'm from Maryland, but, border state, so I like to, straddle both sides of that there. But what can we deduce? What are we seeing play out over the past couple elections? We can say these people, these new folks in South Carolina, how they vote.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, it's not just a monolithic group. There's certainly folks who are coming here to retire that may be a little bit on the conservative side, but there are probably people who, come here, are coming from states that tend to be a little bit more blue, and that's really helped, I think, the Charleston region become more competitive. You're not seeing that quite as much in Myrtle Beach. You're not seeing that quite as much in Hilton Head, where you've also got Beaufort, where you've also got a lot of retirees, and so, I do think the dynamics are different, and certainly what's going on in Charleston, I think the growth has generally helped it be more competitive. it's, Myrtle Beach area still got a little bit of a ways to go.
You know, the growth in the rest of the state has helped it be less competitive. And so you got to remember how and why Charleston's growing. And it is a vibrant city. There are people moving to it for that Charleston vibe, and they are bringing very different attitudes with them. Now you look at who's coming into Myrtle Beach, what type of retirees are coming into there. You have a lot of people from up north, like Gibbs said. What always amuses me a little bit is a lot of these people, have union pensions that they're able to cash in and come down here to the least union state in the United States and then vote incredibly conservatively. And that we're seeing very similar growth patterns in the Rock Hill area. We are one of the fastest growing parts of the state as well, and Charlotte is doing the same thing that Charleston's doing. It is growing in a way that is attracting a lot of diversity. So when you have diversity coming into the area, it is going to certain little blue dots in Charleston in South Carolina, in Charlotte, North Carolina. So who is jumping the line over the border into South Carolina? It's the people who want lower taxes. Unfortunately, a lot of them live with their backs to South Carolina, but more and more of them are moving into South Carolina and becoming fully engaged, but they are highly conservative. So they are making these areas less competitive. So it is all about the nature of the folks, as Gibbs pointed out, who are moving to Charleston versus Myrtle Beach versus the upstate.
And Gibbs, that goes back to our broader discussion here about Democrats trying to win statewide. Sorry, I have a little tongue twister here. But when you look at the Georgias, you look at the North Carolinas and how we're not essentially budging and becoming those, it's because of these influencing factors.
That's right. I mean, there's been growth in South Carolina, but not the kind of growth that there has been in Georgia. And Georgia is just a more diverse place. I mean, South Carolina, it's still, two major racial groups, African Americans and whites. But in Georgia, you've got a lot of folks from other parts of the world. You've got a higher Latinx population. And so there's a little bit more diversity in Georgia. But again, South Carolina, when I think about the South, I sort of think about, those fast growing states. And then the states that are growing a little bit more slowly. And South Carolina is somewhere in the middle. It's certainly not Alabama and Mississippi, but it's not quite Georgia and Virginia either, I don't think. So.
Well, and especially when you look at how large Atlanta is by itself, that's, I think, bigger than the entire state of South Carolina.
That's exactly right. It's exactly
the metrostatic area. But I also want to just really quickly ask you, Scott, about what we talked about previously on This Week in South Carolina. And that was when, Tom Rice in the 7th Congressional District had former House Speaker Paul Ryan come to town, and he was talking about how important it is to keep Rice in the House because he's on the Appropriations Committee. He's rising up in the Budget Writing Committee to help get some tax reform written into law when Republicans take back over in this fall, as they expect to do. But that doesn't matter anymore, right? It doesn't matter if you are in well positioned to help the state. The only thing that matters is how you voted to impeach the president.
Well, and we are national races now. So when you argue, you need to keep this person in Congress because they can help your district, that means nothing to the average voter. The average voter doesn't understand what policy wonk Ryan is talking about. They want to know, is there somebody there who matches my ideology, somebody who I can believe in? And ideologies are nationally driven. So the fact that they look at Tom Rice and say, is he, for Trump? Is he against Trump? And they're far more of a major consideration than it is to say, is he going to be well positioned to bring things back to the 7th District in South Carolina? That's not how they're thinking. They're certainly not thinking about committee assignments. One of the things I learned when I actually polled the new 7th District back in 2012, people didn't know what district they were in a lot of times. A lot of people couldn't name their member of Congress. And so that tells me one thing that people can't name: which committees their congressperson is on. And so coming in with that as your argument, that is not going to lend itself to getting people up and saying, my God, the Budget Committee, I had no idea. I'm changing my vote.
Maybe there's a way to spin that without being so wonky, perhaps, but that's not our job to do. But we do have some new numbers, some winners that we can talk about here, but not yet, I guess, in this Democratic gubernatorial race. With only 27% of votes being counted at this point, Joe Cunningham still has a lead at 57% over State Senator Mia McLeod at 29%. And in the superintendent race, we look at Kathy Manis there, still leading Ellen Weaver. It's still a very close race, and Travis Bedson right there polling at the end at 13%. So Pretty widespread race right there. And in the superintendent of education race for the Democrats, we have Lisa Ellis at 47%, and Gary Burgess at 32%, and Jerry Govan, State Representative Jerry Govan at 20%. So still very fresh. About 16% of counties reporting at this point as well. So a lot of numbers still flowing into the race. Now we're looking at the U.S. Senate race. This is for Democrats who will be running against Senator Tim Scott this fall. That's Catherine Fleming Bruce at 34%, State Representative Crystal Matthews at 34%, and Angela Getter at 32% right there. And again, very early. And of course, our first congressional district race that we've been watching, we've been captivated by. We're looking at incumbent Nancy Mace at about 55% and Katie Arrington at 43%. Again, still very early, 19% of the votes in. And of course, in the 7th congressional district, we have State Representative Russell Fry at 47% and incumbent Tom Rice at 25%. And there are a lot of factors at play there. Again, there are 7 candidates in that race, so we are expecting to go to a runoff, and again, that's determined if you have 50% plus of the vote to win. But really nipping on his heels right there is Barbara Arthur at 18.7% as well. So a lot to watch for. Let's switch. We were just talking about numbers for the Democratic nomination for that Senate race. We're talking about Tim Scott. He's one of the most popular elected officials in South Carolina. He has a massive war chest. What should we be watching for in that race? Does he have to even really do much at this point, Gibbs, to even worry about re-election?
I mean, he's the heavy favorite. I mean, I'd be shocked. There has to be some type of major scandal, some type of major screw up for Tim Scott not to be elected to Senate. He's got all the things. But yeah, it's a very fascinating race. Crystal Matthews is a local representative from down in the Low Country area. And you know, we'll have 2 African-American candidates likely going up against, it looks like that's going to be a runoff, but 2 African-American candidates going up against each other in South Carolina. And, you know, certainly will be very different on policy positions. And so it'll be interesting to see. You know, I hope there'll be at least one debate for that particular election. But again, it is Republicans already start out with an advantage, like I said. But when you go up against somebody as well-liked and beloved as Tim Scott, it's going to be really tough for the Democrats in that particular contest.
Yeah, hard race right there, Scott. When you look at Crystal Matthews raising $102,000 during the campaign cycle and had $27,000 on hand. And Tim Scott is like the #2 fundraiser in Congress. He's raised $44 million this cycle, $24 million on hand. Is basically printing money, it sounds like. And your point, he's always one of the top, most well-liked Republicans, even among Democrats.
Yeah, you know, the fascinating thing about Tim Scott is not only is he consistently the most popular Republican among Republicans, he's fairly popular among the general population as well, including people who aren't even that engaged in politics. If they've heard of Tim Scott, they are much more likely to view him favorably. And so, you know, as Gibbs said, it's going to take a lot to unseat him. You know, Jim DeMint used to avoid debates because he didn't have to. You know, and that could be a strategy of Tim Scott's. It's, you know, and he can take the slings and arrows of being said, why won't you debate me? Well, you know, people have to hear the message, hey, why won't you debate me? And right now, there's not enough money to get that message out. And when you're sitting on a war chest as massive as he is, you can bury your candidate before they even have a chance to get to the wall to fire back. And that's probably what he's going to do. But I would be interested in seeing a debate, as you said, you know, 2 African-American candidates who are so different on policy issues. I think that would be fun to watch.
Well, ETV will definitely be offering a debate come this fall. Several other debates will be up, especially since we have a lot of statewide races to be watching. But speaking of statewide races, we just saw that the Commissioner of Agriculture, Hugh Weathers, has just been nominated to his 6th and final term. This is very exciting for Hugh Weathers. You know his name because he's on about 64,000 gas pumps across the state. And you're probably watching your gas prices go up. You're also looking around and saying, who is this Hugh Weathers person? Well, they inspect those, his office inspects those manually. So
sure, you want to look anywhere other than the price.
Anything besides the price.
Yeah.
So you're like, Hugh Weathers, at least they're not blaming him for the gas prices. But we have a list of other incumbents that have already won as well. These are some Republicans in Congress. That's Senator Tim Scott, who we were just talking about. We have Representative Jeff Duncan from District 3, Representative Joe Wilson from District 2, and Representative Ralph Norman from District 5. Jeff Duncan doesn't have any challenger this fall either. Also looking at some statewide winners as well. Alan Wilson is the Attorney General in the state. He's also won his race this evening. Congressman Jim Clyburn, like we said, up for his 16th term. He's got the nomination for the 6th District. Mark Hammond, Secretary of State, also winning his nomination, as well as Hugh Weathers, who we were just talking about right there. So a lot of big races. We also have a lot of state house races that unfortunately we can't talk about all of them, but there are plenty of things happening in the state house this year. I think there are about 37 Republicans up or being challenged. Of course, all 124 House members are up for election, but 37 Republicans are being challenged. 12 Democrats are being challenged, and there's a couple of vacancies as well. I think there's about 13 vacancies overall. So I know you guys were talking more of these broad issues, of course, but when you start looking at turnover in state houses, hardcore Republican held state houses here in South Carolina, specifically the House, because the Senate's not up for election this year, what do you deduce when you see that kind of turnover, Gibbs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows you that this, it's a part-time job. You get very little pay. For some folks, it's a lot of travel if they don't live right here in the Columbia area. And so, at some point they just get worn down and they want to go and do something different. But it creates opportunities for other people to get these positions of power. And obviously with Hugh Leatherman, being out, he sort of controlled state politics for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of a new opportunity for a new group of leaders in South Carolina. And some of that's going to be sorted out tonight.
And we've seen a lot of changes in the House there too, Scott, when it comes to, we have a new House Speaker with Merle Smith from Sumter. We have a new House Majority Leader with Davey Hyde, who's actually being challenged tonight. This was before he became House Majority Leader, replacing Gary Simrel from up in York. But you just have a lot. Even these Republicans that are very conservative, right-wing Republicans are being challenged with one or two challengers. A lot of people decided not to run again this year, but a few folks are facing some pretty tight challenges, including people like Rita Allison, who's the chairwoman of the House Education Committee, which oversaw getting, hours and hours of hearings on critical race theory. Also passed that transgender student athlete ban bill, which got passed into law. So it's fascinating to see all these dynamics at play. There's also a lot of money in those races as well. So what are you picking up on these races?
Well, I think you're right that it seems surprising that you have, candidates, incumbents who are extremely conservative suddenly being challenged from even further right. And I think that says a lot about the passion that we're seeing in local politics. The Trump folks and the folks who look at January 6th, as something other than insurrection, have become very passionate. And we see movements across America, things like Christian nationalism. And within the Republican Party, Christian nationalism has driven so many of these new ideas. And somebody can be an incredibly faithful Republican, but if they are seen as not hitting the proper notes on one or two of those, ideological, test marks, then all of a sudden they're going to be threatened. Now, how serious of a threat that is, that's completely different. You have to remember that social media seems to create an echo chamber, and a lot of these folks who are running against incumbents feel that they have a lot more support than they really do. They have a lot of friends giving them likes and thumbs ups or whatever you get on various social media things, and they are speaking to people who are like-minded with them. And so when they are talking about a conservative incumbent and saying they're not conservative enough, the only voices they're hearing back are ones that are echoing them. So the nature of social media, the nationalization of politics, and the strong ideologies that we're seeing that are becoming sort of the litmus test of what a, quote, real Republican is, that's what I think is driving what otherwise would be an incumbent coasting and not even having a challenger.
And it's interesting, too, Gibbs, because everyone loves to say, oh, well, South Carolina, the State House, it's not D.C. We get along, we work together. And now you're getting these Republican on Republican challengers infighting from some sitting House members fighting other House members on the campaign trail, sending out mailers based on votes that are based on amendments to these bills that are just floated essentially to create these mailers. It seems like it's creating a toxic environment for South Carolina. I don't know who wins in this situation.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly not good for the state. I mean, I agree it's the nationalization of politics, like Scott said. And again, think about what happened with the Democrats. The Democrats controlled South Carolina politics for a really long time, but really the only game in town was the Democratic primary. And so there were fights among the Democrats. Republicans have become so dominant, particularly in the legislature. There's always going to be factions. There's always going to be differences. It's not particularly surprising that there's infighting within the Republican Party, because in some places the Democrats have not provided much competition.
And when we kind of want to zoom back out to the 7th Congressional District, one of the top races that we're watching tonight, I just see Steve Kornacki from NBC News, MSNBC, just mentioning that we got a ton of same-day votes from Horry County, which is half the district, and Russell Fry is winning them at a 53% rate. Oof. And he now leads overall at 48.6%. Of course, you need that 50% plus 1 to defeat Tom Rice outright. And then meanwhile, 37% reported now in SC1. And Nancy Mace leads Katie Arrington 52 to 46%. Arrington just got a boost from same-day votes from Dorchester County, still no votes from Beaufort County. Could be decisive, of course, right? Gibbs, you live down there. Beaufort County is a big red district.
It's a big red district, and that's where a lot of folks think it's going to be, Mace is going to do better in Charleston County, but Beaufort County could really decide it. And, Arrington was getting some big crowds down there. She got a lot of support down there. And so, once those come in, it could tighten up a little bit. I've been watching that race all night, and it's now, as you can see, within 10 percentage points. That's a good showing by Arrington. Mm-hmm. She certainly, was outraised and, other than Trump, out endorsed. But it's tightening up a little bit.
What's it like at the Mace camp right now? What do you think, Scott?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think they feel they're going to pull out a win. Mm-hmm. Again, she's a polished candidate, but they've got to be watching these returns, hoping that it doesn't just continue to creep up. And I think that you have a little more confidence in the Mace camp than you have in the Rice camp right now. Tom Rice, especially when we saw the initial numbers that came in, we knew that those were early votes, right? So whenever you see 0% reporting, but you actually see votes, you can look at that and go, well, okay, who's voting? Is that phantom voting? No, that's the early voting. Mm-hmm. And so we could see how far ahead Fry was in that, which meant same day of voting had to go for Tom Rice. And we're seeing these numbers out of Myrtle Beach, out of Horry County, coming in so strongly for his opponent. That means he's going to have to hope for strong turnout deeper in his district. And of course, since Horry County is really the population heart of the 7th district, that's going to be tough to pull off. And so at this point, he's really just hoping to keep Fry under 50% and of course keep ahead of the third candidate.
Mm-hmm. And just going back to the 1st Congressional, I'm talking to Meg Kennard of the AP. She's based there right now. She says the party is cracking and the mood is optimistic. Supporters are taking to the mic every so often to update results. As we can see, that's a live shot there from the Mace Watch Party there in Patriots Point on the golf course. Seems pretty poppin', I guess. Maybe off camera behind us we can't see, but Mace is up right now for the time being. We're still waiting to see how things shake out. It's still early, but they're watching closely as this race gets tighter. And again, like we said, Beaufort County, a big county, a lot of retirees down there as well, a lot of transplants there. We're still waiting to see those results. Beaufort County, let us know. We're dying to know. It's like we got modern technology that we can tabulate these votes, and let's do it. But I want to also talk about, we're talking about that environment, that D.C. environment in South Carolina, that creep that's starting to happen. And one of the advisory questions on the ballot today, on the Republican ballot, these are advisory questions. These are non-binding. They're just kind of polling folks. And they were asking about, whether we should have partisan elections where you register by party, since we have open primaries right now. And then also, if school boards should be partisan too. I mean, there are a few in the state that are partisan, but not many. But both of these questions are polling well over 75, 80%. Right. Takeaways from that there, Gibbs?
So they look like they're going to pass. But, I really like an open primary. I like the ability to figure out which primary you're going to vote in. I think it can ultimately make for more electable candidates, maybe a less ideologically pure candidates in some ways, which makes them better general election candidates. And so, other states you register by party. North Carolina is certainly one. You have an option to register as unaffiliated, but I'll be very interested to see what the legislature, what the parties ultimately decide to do with this.
Scott, do we need partisan school board elections in South Carolina?
Well, one of the reasons the party in power often wants partisan elections because some of these elections are very low information affairs. And so in order to let the voter know, hey, how should I vote? They're not going to be able to go look up votes of somebody who's never never run for election before, and so they're running for school board. They don't know anything about the candidates. Well, if you are the dominant party in the state, the one thing you want every voter to know is which are your candidates. And if you're the party in power, you want to keep your party as pure as possible, so you are more likely to want to close primaries or have only semi-open primaries where registered Democrats absolutely can't. This goes to something Gibbs was talking about earlier. There's always this great fear that the other party is going to cross over in huge numbers and choose the most unelectable candidate. And there's two things that I think we should remember about that. Second, of course, it anecdotally happens, but it has never happened in large enough numbers that we have clearly seen that it's made a difference in a primary election that ended up having an impact on the general election. The other thing is anecdotally, and again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but anecdotally, what we've heard about in this election is Democrats coming over to vote for the more moderate candidate because they think the Republicans probably going to win the general election. So what have we heard talk about in the 7th district? Not Democrats coming over and trying to figure out who's least electable. Democrats coming over and say, hey, I want the more moderate of it. The same thing when you talk about, okay, the Republican superintendent of education. Superintendent of education was the last statewide seat held by Democrats with Inez Tannenbaum. And so the idea of, okay, well, we might not even be able to get that back again. So if we're going to cross over, we'll vote for the more moderate candidate. So even what the folks who are calling for closed primaries, the reason they say they want them, that's not even happening anecdotally this time. And of course, I think Gibbs and I have a political scientist bias for open primaries. It's better when you can sort of examine all candidates and know that you can either pick and choose and go in where you know your vote's going to be the most meaningful, or it's just more fun to watch as a political scientist.
Especially for Democrats,
frankly.
since it's very difficult to win statewide in the fall. So you get your voice heard, I guess, in these primaries, of course.
Which is exactly why the Republicans are having this advisory thing, and they don't want that.
And it's interesting to note as well that we had, going back to this discussion about the State House becoming more DC, we did have massive bipartisan, bicameral support for the election integrity and early voting bill. We are having our first election with early voting in the state, true early voting. We had more than 100,000 ballots cast for the first 2 weeks of June. And they also made absentee mail-in ballots mail-in only. You had to have an excuse to vote. That was usually the only way you could vote absentee early in our state. So it's super interesting to see how that played out, especially when you have an election reform bill that is bipartisan in both houses.
That was good to see, and I'm a big fan of early voting. I think we need to put fewer barriers in place of voting, not more barriers in place of voting. It was a little bit in Charleston County, there was just one place to go, and so I hope we can figure out a way to improve that. We had basically just the county election board where you could go and vote early. I hope for the general we're going to have more locations open up, but definitely a good sign. You don't have to make up an excuse or anything like that. You could just go vote early if it's more convenient. And again, that's the way to go. We want more people voting, not less people voting.
We're going to jump to the coast where Victoria Hansen is at Tom Rice's watch party in Myrtle Beach. Hey, Victoria.
Hi, Gavin. Hi, everybody. Back in the studio again. Victoria Hansen in North Myrtle Beach at Brothers Grill. This has been the watch party for Congressman Tom Rice. And I am joined right now by a former congressman who I just had the opportunity to meet. This is Robin Talon. And explain a little bit about why you're here, the district you represented, and how it's changed.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm delighted to be here supporting Tom Rice. Before Tom ran, I had been out of Congress for a number of years, and reapportionment came along because the census mandated that. So I retired when they created a minority district in my old district. I came back thinking about running when Congressman Rice did. Got to looking at Tom and his record on county council and who he was, and I went to him and said, I'm Robin Talon. He said, yeah, I know who you are. I said, I want to support you and encourage you to run for the United States Congress, and I've been a proud, strong supporter for the past 10 years.
I know we've only seen a couple of numbers coming in right now, but they haven't looked real good. I mean, we were talking a little bit about, the stance that he took, the vote that he took, and the fact, that he didn't waver on it. Once he took that impeachment vote, he didn't separate himself from it. You had some thoughts on that?
Well, Tom is a man of character, unquestioned integrity. He did what he thought was the right thing. I'm disappointed that it may cost him his seat in Congress, but Tom Rice is a special individual. There's another election in 2 years, and there will be, if he doesn't make it tonight, there will be an asterisk by his name in the South Carolina history books as a member of South Carolina from Congress who stood up and did what every other Republican in this state know they should have done, and that's vote to impeach Donald Trump.
So are you saying there's another race in 2 years? The former President Donald Trump is, some have called it a revenge tour, going around and backing the people he feels like wronged him, betrayed him. Do you think that'll be over by then? Or?
I do. I think, of course, the committee in Congress that's investigating more is coming out every day. I think Trump's popularity is waning, and we're going to miss Tom Rice if he's not reelected. His leadership, his status across the country, and there'll be a call for him to seek reelection again, and I'll lead it if he doesn't make it tonight.
I've been watching him kind of work the room, and I've noticed that he's really, he's sitting down at a booth right here to our right, just a couple steps away. He really seems to be taking his time to talk to people. Are you seeing that too?
Well, he's always been that way. He's just such a transparent, honest, hardworking, no rah-rah politician, and Tom's going to be fine. He's got a wonderful family. He's so capable. We have not heard, under any circumstances, the last of Tom Rice. That final chapter has not been written.
Do you wonder, let's say, if Russell Fry does win tonight, what does he bring to the table, do you think?
Well, I honestly don't know Mr. Fry. I'm sure he's a fine fella, but all I've heard is that he was endorsed by Donald Trump. And to try to step into Tom Rice's shoes in the United States Congress with his seniority, his committee assignments, what he's accomplished for this district and this country, Mr. Fry's got a steep hill to climb.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I appreciate you letting us speak with you tonight, and we'll see what happens, right?
Yes, we will. Thank you for being here.
And that was Victoria Hanson there at Tom Rice's watch party in Myrtle Beach. She was talking to former Democratic Congressman Robin Talon. He served in the House from 1983 through 1993. He preceded Congressman Jim Clyburn in the 6th Congressional District. Right now, we're going to see some new numbers so we can talk about what's happening. We have about 30 minutes till 10 o'clock. And we want to get an update on what we're seeing right now statewide and in some of these races. For the governor's race for Democrats, we are looking at Joe Cunningham at 57% and State Senator Mimi McLeod at almost 30%. That's 35.5% of votes being counted right now. Still a lot to be counted across the state for this race, and we'll be watching that as well. Of course, with the Superintendent of Education, we have Kathy Manis still leading Ellen Weaver. It's a very interesting race playing out right now. About 18% of this race is being reported so far. Again, Kathy Manis, a more moderate who's been endorsed by outgoing Superintendent of Education Molly Spearman, and Ellen Weaver, a more conservative Republican running for this nomination. All of them are both leading Travis Bedson, who's there at 13.9%. And we go to the Democratic side of the ballot for the Superintendent of Education. We see that Lisa Ellis is there at 47.3%. She's the one that founded that SC for Ed movement, so she's garnering a lot of support there. She's also leading Gary Burgess, who has 32%, and State Representative Jerry Govan at 20%. And in the Senate, we're looking to see who is going to be facing against Senator Tim Scott this fall. Look at Crystal Matthews right there. She's a state representative. She's at 34.4%. Catherine Fleming Bruce is at 34% as well, pretty much neck and neck. And then Angela Getter right there at 31.5%. Easy to say that there's a runoff going to happen in that race. And then, of course, in the 1st Congressional District race between incumbent Nancy Mace at 53% and Katie Arrington at 45%. Katie Arrington, a former state representative as well. And in the 7th Congressional District, we just talked to Victoria over there. Russell Fry is at 49%, so he's below that 50% he needs to hold on to get to the nomination outright. But of course, that number's been going up and down, and he's getting close, it looks like, especially since he's leading incumbent Tom Rice at 25%. 51% of those votes have been counted so far, so we're still waiting to see a lot of those come in. Very close race there. And when we look at the House District Race 4 up in the upstate there, William Timmons is leading Pastor Mark Burns 56% to 21%. William Timmons has been endorsed by former President Donald Trump, and he's looking to get reelected there pretty much outright at this point. So a lot at play there. And Scott, I don't know if you want to take it away when we look at the 4th Congressional District, if you have anything to add to what we're seeing play out with William Timmons and Pastor Mark Burns. But, you know, when you have that endorsement from Trump, it pretty much is a seal of approval.
Well, and you know, and this plays into what we were talking about before. Here is somebody who's an incumbent who has proved their loyalty not only to party, but their loyalty to Trump. So, you know, what else is there? You know, what could Timmons have done more? And based on Pastor Mark Burns, he wasn't harsh enough against LGBT. You know, Pastor Burns said that he thinks that parents who allow their children to think about becoming trans should, I believe he used the word executed. So he's very passionate about that issue. And given the fact that Timmons is an incredibly conservative Republican, has Trump's seal of approval, this really looks like sort of a one-issue kind of attack. But he's doing fairly well for somebody, and it doesn't look like it's going to go to a runoff. But the fact that he is garnering as many votes as he did means that he has used his platform, and he does have quite a platform as as an evangelical preacher. He's used his platform well.
But yeah, William Timmons there seeking his 3rd term, pretty much looking pretty safe at this point as well. Gibbs, anything else you want to add to what we're seeing play out across the state, especially when it comes to Republican on Republican primaries like that? You know,
just this issue that's taking place nationally. It's this, you know, are you with Trump or are you against Trump? I mean, that is kind of the single issue we've seen played out across the country. Some of the elections in Georgia, the folks who fought against Trump ended up winning. There's been other places where we've seen, you know, it's been, if you've gone against Trump, that's been the end. And we're seeing that play out a little bit in the 7th Congressional District. But, you know, that to me is the big issue tonight. And we'll know a lot more tonight. And of course, the January 6th hearings have been on. So it's got a lot of people are thinking about Donald Trump like they haven't maybe in a few months. And so it's definitely on people's mind. And again, you know, it's so strange, Gavin, to have an ex-president. You know, I think about George W. Bush. He's riding mountain bikes and painting watercolors in Texas. And cutting down trees in Texas. And you've got a former president getting involved in primary politics. It's almost unheard of. You know, usually you let your own party fight it out. Maybe you'll get involved in a general election from time to time. But to have, and again, so much of it is personal. Were you for me or were you against me? You know, Trump was an unorthodox candidate. He was an unorthodox president, and he's certainly an unorthodox ex-president as well.
You know, and when you talk about the races statewide, especially in the congressional districts, we keep coming back to the redistricting. And, you know, the districts were all made safer. And of course, the 1st district, however, became more of a swing district, but that has to do with settlement patterns. But every other district became safer. And so in this redistricting process, we actually asked citizens in South Carolina in the last Winthrop poll, do they think that the redistricting process was done fairly? And pluralities of folks did not think it was fair. They don't necessarily think they're being fairly represented. Now, I'd like to hearken back to something I said before, that a lot of people don't even know what congressional district they're in. So it probably says more to how they feel about the overall fairness of the process rather than their specific knowledge as to how the districts are drawn. But that redistricting is playing in both loud and subtle ways across all of these elections.
It's interesting. I know you're talking about redistricting, but I want to talk statewide, looking at the superintendent race, of course, like we mentioned. We're talking about the Republican race. There are 6 Republicans running in that race right now. We're seeing Kathy Manis lead that pack right now at 33%, especially over Ellen Weaver at 22%. Again, 35% of the votes still coming in. Still very early, of course, but it's interesting to see Manis, who is a moderate in this race, really keeping that lead. especially, Scott, when we talk about the superintendent of education race. We were talking about this earlier, but the superintendent of education was about to be made into a cabinet position, something that was appointed to by the governor. Voters rejected that in 2018, but what they didn't reject is the need for these candidates to have a master's degree. Ellen Weaver does not have a master's degree, but it sounds like she's trying to get one by Election Day, which even if she does, still a question mark if she gets it by Election Day or not in terms of how that plays out. So I'm wondering, do you think that matters that much, or do you think folks are looking at that, her being associated with, the Palmetto Promise Institute, which is a conservative advocacy group funded in part with former U.S. Senator Jim DeMint. She's also been endorsed by a lot of those upstate congressmen, a lot of state lawmakers too, and she's also raised the most money in that race.
Well, you can't just sort of hand wave away official requirements, and so
It's
that's
like following rules for a test.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. and believe me, they try. Our students try. So, but no. So that could come to the forefront. But then you talk about obscure education questions. They'll be looking at, okay, what's the accreditation of the body then where she's getting the master's? Does that matter? Does it matter what the master's is in? The answer to that, I believe, is no. It doesn't really matter what the master's is in. So this is something that will have to be answered. If she ends up being the nominee, this is something that can't be brushed aside just because she is a beloved candidate by all of these folks who have endorsed her. I mean, we have requirements for office, in the United States, and unless they are deemed unconstitutional, for example, it used to be that you had to profess to be a Christian in virtually every state before you were allowed to hold office. Okay, that was declared unconstitutional, but until these requirements are declared unconstitutional, which there's no reason this would be, it's something that's going to have to be addressed.
Gibbs, you want to jump on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird, this is on the ballot, not too, pretty recently, this master's requirement. But yeah, I mean, it's, there's online programs, you can do education in ways that you couldn't before, but it's certainly going to be tough to get that degree in less than a year. So, that stresses me out about all running for office and having to take all those tests and write all those papers. So.
Yeah, you can see those numbers right there. And of course, we already saw a few people drop off the ballot because they did not have the requirement. They didn't think that they'd have enough time to get a master's degree ahead of Election Day. Ellen Weaver believes she can. She's going to Bob Jones University to get this master's. We'll see some more details.
Which is where she got her undergrad, I believe. Yeah.
So again, she's going up against Kathy Manis, who is a director of the Palmetto State Teachers Association. She's a former teacher herself. So a lot of different factors at play. And I know Lynn Teague with the League of Women Voters tweeted this recently. She said, if a party nominates someone who does not complete the requirements for the office in time, is it the party simply without a candidate for that office? To which the State Election Commission tweeted back, political parties are charged with determining qualifications and certifying candidates to state or county election authorities to put them on the ballot. The certification language has a meets or will meet clause. At the close of the election, the SEC certifies results and reports winners to the Secretary of State. We're not aware of any state law that directly addresses this issue, and if an unqualified candidate wins, we will seek legal advice to determine next steps. So very exciting news to look forward to in November should this happen.
To be determined.
I mean, that was one of the most eloquent shoulder shrugs I believe I've heard. We have no idea.
That's state agency right there. That's the way it works right there. So again, we're still watching a lot of races. It's almost 9:45. We still really don't have a lot of news to report besides some outright wins for some of these candidates who didn't really have major opposition, but we're still watching, of course, the big news out of the 1st Congressional District and the 7th Congressional District, where we have Trump-endorsed candidates who are on the ballot working to throw out some of these incumbents like Nancy Mace and Tom Rice. So a lot to be determined right there. What happens, Scott, if there isn't really a clear winner from the 7th Congressional District? I mean, does that ruin President Donald Trump's birthday today? It's his 76th birthday. I'm assuming he was going to hopefully get a clean sweep from the 1st and the 7th.
I imagine that no matter what happens, he's going to be having a happy birthday probably down at Mar-a-Lago doing his trademark dance and just having a good time.
That was good. I like that.
I appreciate that. I've been working on that. So, but there's also a good chance that he would lose in the Nancy Mace race. So the real question may be, does he come out 50-50 or does he come out with 0 complete wins and only a question of a possible win in a runoff?
have to look
And
that
as
one
you
up.
can see, it's getting close to 50%. There was 75%.
So he may be 50-50.
Right.
Whereas if Arrington fails to make a runoff, and Fry means if Fry wins outright, then Trump will be 50-50.
And can we deduce that that's going to be the case in the 1st congressional district, Gibbs, because we didn't see much support from the president outside of that March 12th rally in Florence in the 7th congressional
It
district.
didn't even come to the 1st congressional district, exactly. So yeah, I mean, and that race is getting closer. I mean, we've got 50% reporting, and that's narrowed a good bit as well. And so, I mean, Donald Trump, I think in that particular district, in Mount Pleasant and Daniel Island and those types of places, I don't feel like Trump has the support that he has in other areas. And so I think a Trump endorsement probably means a little bit less in the 1st. Certainly in the general election, it would probably get you in some trouble if you're trying to get some crossover voters. But in that primary, I mean, as Scott Huffmon has said a bunch of times tonight, and he's so right, the people who show up in primaries tend to be the most ideological, and so it's the Republicans tend to be more conservative, the Democrats tend to be a little bit more moderate or liberal in primaries in South Carolina, and so that really helps candidates like Curtis Fry and Katie Arrington.
And I want to just point to a tweet I just saw from Dave Wasserman. Wasserman?
Yeah, from Georgia.
Yes, from the Cook Political Report. He's the U.S. House editor of the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. And he just tweeted that it's interesting that Arrington won the tiny corner of Jasper County in SCO1 by 61% to 37%. Perhaps an omen that Beaufort County might not come in as strong for Nancy Mace as its moderate GOP reputation. It's going to be close. So we're talking about Beaufort County.
But the Jasper County, I believe, very strong African-American population in most of Jasper County. Well, if you go back to something Gibbs and I teach, V.O. Key, godfather of Southern politics, then you tend to have historically the most conservative whites in the place where you have the highest populations of African Americans. So think in that little area, if it is, and I haven't seen the map, but if it is in an area that has a strong African American presence, then the only people voting in this particular primary will be the most conservative whites. And so that could explain it. But again, I haven't seen the map. I have not looked at it.
And we're still waiting on Beaufort County numbers, I believe. So that's something, Gibbs, that we're saying is a big factor.
And he's saying it's a more moderate place. I would think Beaufort County could potentially be a little more conservative, certainly more conservative than Charleston. I mean, I live in Charleston County, so compared to Charleston County, Beaufort is more conservative. But I do think it's pretty clear that what happens, Beaufort County can really be the area that really decides this race. And if those numbers haven't really come in and it's already pretty close, Katie Arrington, Nancy Mace was certainly the favorite, but Katie Arrington may end up doing a little bit better. Maybe I don't think there's going to be a runoff because there's one other candidate. She's on the ballot, but she's dropped out, and so she's getting some votes. Yeah, she's getting some votes, but I would expect this one to be decided. But it's looking a little closer than I was expecting.
Yeah, right now in the first, it's 53% for Nancy Mace and 45% for Katie Arrington. 17% of the precincts reporting, so a lot still to be determined. We're almost at 10 o'clock. Polls have been closed since 7 p.m. We had a lot of those early voting ballots already cast and tabulated. So far, about 318,000 ballots have been tabulated so far, according to the State Election Commission. We're going to start maybe talking to some of our reporters out and around the districts. We have Felicia Edie at Joe Cunningham, and we have, of course, Victoria Hansen with Tom Rice. So we're going to maybe check in with them in a moment, just to see what the vibes are like at those locations, because again, a lot of races, these close races, we haven't been able to call or talk about in specificity at this point because of that. And again, we're going to go back to Victoria Hansen right now in Myrtle Beach. She has Congressman Tom Rice again with her. We can catch up with them.
Okay. Let me talk before you leave. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Sorry, I can't hear you guys back there. But right now I have Congressman Tom Rice. He says he's getting ready to leave. Well, I'll let you explain. I should put the mic so you can hear me. Congressman Rice, you want to talk to us. What's going on?
Well, I just want to say Russell had a good night tonight, and I had hoped the situation would be reversed. But you know what? This isn't my seat. It belongs to the voters, and the voters know best. So I'm happy. I'm so proud of how far we've come, and we got to go into a runoff now, and we'll fight hard till the end, and look forward to continuing the spirited debate.
You've been talking to a lot of supporters tonight. In fact, I talked with former Congressman Talon, who said, you know what? if it doesn't go well, they still support you?
Well, you know, I've been blessed to have so many wonderful people around me, and I focused my entire time in Congress on giving people a fair shot at the American dream, and we've accomplished so much. I mean, unemployment's down 75%, poverty's down 30%, wages are up 35%, hundreds of millions of dollars into the district. I'm real proud of what I've gotten done. I wouldn't change one single thing. So as I said, from 2 years ago till today, you know, I will accept the verdict of the people, and whatever that is, I will be happy with it.
You know that former President Donald Trump is going to have some words about this race tonight, probably. You want to talk about that first before he gets a chance to?
He can say whatever he wants to. You know, I've made my opinions about him very well known.
How closely have you been watching the hearings?
Well, I've been campaigning.
But you said, again, I have to ask you, no regrets about that vote?
And I know I did the right thing. I would do it again tomorrow. I don't vote for the job. I vote to do the right thing. I don't vote for a man. I vote to uphold the Constitution.
Any message to your supporters?
I love you. Thanks for letting me represent you. I'm going to keep trying. 2-week runoff. Come on out and vote.
And anything I haven't asked you, anything you want to add?
I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Congressman, were you surprised at all by Russell Fry performing better than perhaps?
That was Congressman Tom Rice right there. It sounded like a farewell speech. It was not, but it sounded like that was it.
Yeah, I mean, because he's saying he's going to be in a runoff. You know, it's possible that Russell Fry could get the 50%. And then, you know, like you said, there's some really conservative candidates. They're getting pretty good chunks of the vote. And if that you know, if 7 in 10 or 8 in 10 of those go to Russell Fry, it could be a pretty easy 2 weeks for Russell Fry. So, you know, certainly Tom Rice did not seem super confident that he was going to be returning to Congress based on that particular interview.
I pulled up the map,
yeah,
and Horry County is still reporting, and those were coming in favor of Fry. And the one county that had not reported at all was Dillon, and putting all of your eggs in that basket to keep
it's a small county, right?
Yeah, it's a very small county comparatively, and so that's a tough ask.
Especially when we know half the district voters are in Horry County, essentially, you know, voting point in. And I just got a text from someone with the Fry campaign who's saying that there will not be a runoff. Of course, we are waiting to hear the Associated Press call this race in any shape or form, so we haven't heard that yet. But their internal precinct tracking points out that Russell has 52.5% with almost 60,000 votes cast. So that's
the way they've been coming in. I think that's reachable.
So it's almost seeming like that's why we heard Tom Rice maybe in that downtrodden mood right there.
Right.
A lot to watch, and we're still with you all right now. I know it's almost 10 o'clock, but we're waiting to get a little bit more confirmation. We were going to possibly go off the air at 10 o'clock, but we might stay a little bit further depending if we hear some more results or speeches from candidates that we want to bring to you live over the air. Of course, we're on South Carolina Public Radio and South Carolina ETV channels across the state and on our social media platforms. I have Gibbs Knotts. He's the Dean of Social Sciences, Humanities and Social Sciences at the College of Charleston. And of course, Scott Huffmon with Winthrop University. You guys are always with us, always talking about these things on these big days, breaking down the news for folks.
I do want to know why it really should be social sciences and humanities.
It would help me out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The humanities and the social sciences are both equally important, I tell you.
Says the dean.
That's right.
Says the dean. Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't been calling you
Keep
dean all
those
night.
people in English and philosophy. I want to make sure in the humanities they do great work.
Yes, you two are both the deans of South Carolina politics in our eyes. So, Felicia Edie's there at Joe Cunningham headquarters there in Charleston. We want to check in with her and see how things are going. It seems like a lively atmosphere at the music farm. Hey, Felicia.
Hey, Gavin, we are still here at the music farm in downtown Charleston. We're expecting to hear from Joe Cunningham soon. Earlier, within the past hour, he came for the first time and addressed the crowd and introduced who he called his good friend, Dr. Annie Andrews. There, she shared with the crowd why she is running to hopefully flip back blue, the first congressional seat, the seat that Joe Cunningham had flipped back in 2018. And she said to audiences here tonight that it doesn't matter who wins the first congressional district primary tonight. She referred to both Mace and Arrington as having the same values and loving Trump. She says that she is ready to work for our children because our current representative in this area is not. Also, other indicators that tonight is shaping up as more results come in, as we are seeing more results come in, more indicators that tonight is shaping up, and we are steadily moving towards the general election in November. Just wrapped up a media call with Congressman Clyburn where he thanked his family and friends for their help in his primary race, but also he said that Joe Cunningham ran a good campaign and that he is excited and very happy to run on a ticket with him and all of tonight's nominees. Also, Governor Henry McMaster also tweeted a very interesting tweet, but it's another indicator that we are shaping up and moving forward towards our general election. Earlier tonight, Governor Henry McMaster tweeted, "I am honored at the trust and confidence South Carolinians have placed in me as their governor." He goes on to say that let us continue working together, let us keep winning, the best is yet to come. Back to you.
That's Felicia Edie there at Joe Cunningham's headquarters there. Again, a little dose of the spin doctors in the background. I know my Gen Xers are jealous of that on set here.
Man.
But it's interesting to note because we're talking about the Democratic gubernatorial race right now, and I'm seeing on Twitter that Mia McLeod is saying, we don't know what the results will be for tonight's race. What I do know is we ran one hell of a race. So she's talking right now to supporters, thanking supporters, and saying that it's been an amazing journey. We still are waiting for a lot of those numbers to come in. We can bring those numbers up right now and look at those and see just exactly how close they are right now. Again, it's still very early in a lot of these races. That's why they haven't been called yet. We're waiting for the Associated Press to make those calls before we give you any confirmations. But so far, it looks like we have been seeing Joe Cunningham hang on there at 57%, and Mia McLeod at 30%, with 35% of these precincts reporting. So a pretty hefty margin right there, Gibbs, when you're talking about making up the difference and even getting into a runoff at this point.
I agree. I mean, there's 5 candidates in this race. I mean, obviously 2 candidates had the funding in Cunningham and McLeod, and Cunningham had a big advantage over McLeod. So with 5 candidates to get in without a runoff would be pretty impressive. But yeah, Cunningham's been up all night. I don't know what's still outstanding. I'd like to see, is it areas, particularly if it's areas where McLeod has more name recognition and could do better. But it's been a pretty steady lead for Joe Cunningham all night. And, obviously his folks are hoping to get into the general to start turning their attention to Henry McMaster and not have to go through 2 weeks of more campaigning. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, but we just want to be cautious. We don't want to call something without being absolutely sure.
Yeah, and Gibbs, to that point, I just brought up some numbers from scvotes.org, and Joe Cunningham right now with 55% of the vote in Richland County, Sam McLeod's home county here, he has 58% of that vote. Of course, there's still more results to come in, but if he's already going towards that incumbent, towards that home candidate, it's interesting to see that might be an indicator there. Of course, we heard Senator McLeod talking. She did not concede, but she was talking about the journey and how much of an impact it's been in her time. She's still going to be in the state Senate if she doesn't win, or if they go to a runoff and former Congressman Cunningham does win, but still a lot of unknowns right now. Especially
he's going to pick a lieutenant governor candidate too, because they run as a ticket. So who knows who he's going to pick as lieutenant governor?
I was trying to get them out to answer that question on the debate stage the other day. No one really kind of gave definitives. We were asking about characteristics, but I would have loved to have known who's going to be joining them on the ticket, since that's obviously what we do now in South Carolina. But just want to also add that when you tally up all these other candidates in that race, Carlton Boyd, Calvin McMillan, William Williams, that's about 13% of the vote right there that could have gone to either of those candidates. When we're talking about these top tier candidates, Scott, is that how do you factor? What do you think about when we talk these other candidates in these races that aren't top candidates per se?
Well, you have to look at it 2 ways. One way is, okay, if you add these up, would it be enough to completely change the outcome? But we're making assumptions that don't necessarily follow, because what if a lot of people wouldn't have turned out to vote if these further down candidates weren't on? So we're making assumptions about who actually is turning out, that the same people would have turned out, and if their favored candidate hadn't been there, they would have picked one of the top 2. When the fact is, and I made a Ross Perot quip earlier, but the fact is a lot of the Ross Perot voters might not have turned out. So you can't automatically assume his voters would have gone to George H.W. Bush. You can't automatically assume that the Cunningham or the non-leader voters would have automatically gone to a challenger or somebody else. So yes, it's true that if those votes went to one of the candidates, it could truly upset the race. But it's also true those voters might not have actually turned out had those down ticket kind of folks not been on there.
Mm-hmm. So an interesting message that everyone sends when they're on the ballot, that every vote makes a difference. We know that. We've seen these details play out statewide, and we're going to also look at how this votes are playing out right now in some of these other races that we've been watching throughout the night, like the state superintendent of education, and of course the congressional races that we've been watching all night as well. We want to get the latest numbers to bring you so we can give you updates on those races, because they have not been called yet. We're still waiting for the Associated Press to determine winners in those races or possible runoffs in those races. And of course, we'll bring those numbers to you when we have them. But so far, we're still waiting. We're still hoping maybe we'll get a winner while we're still on air for a little bit longer to bring you some victory speeches or some concession speeches, because it's pretty much up in the air right now, right? Some of these races. Anything else you guys deduce from primary nights in general when we look at these races, when we see fresh voter data? I know you guys probably salivate over that, but anything that you'll be taking away that you'll be maybe teaching your students about when they get back to campus this fall, Gibbs?
I want to look at turnout. I want to see if some of these new turnout, making it a little bit easier to vote in South Carolina, made a difference. And I want to also just look at, total number of Republican voters, total number of Democratic voters once the dust settles, kind of see how far behind the Democrats are. It's not always a super easy comparison to make depending on who's running, but that's something that I'll definitely be looking at as well.
And on that the great comparison for turnout numbers is going to be, Trump didn't have a challenger in the Republican primary in 2020. So we're going to be able to compare an off presidential year primary in 2018, a Republican presidential primary in 2020 where Trump was unchallenged, with the off-year primary now with slightly new rules. So we've got some good points of comparison, and that may seem a little bit dry, but the fact is, I think everybody knows the old adage, well, elections are won by votes. Yeah, and turnout makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Got to get out and vote to know what's going on. It's been 3 hours since the polls have closed in South Carolina. It's now 10 o'clock, and if you're now just joining us, welcome. This is South Carolina ETV and Public Radio's live coverage of the 2022 primary election. And some of the races we have been watching have winners already, and they've been declared, and we'll bring those to you right now in a graphic on our screen. Not very contentious races. These are a lot of folks that we've been expecting to win, but right now these are the contentious races we'll be looking at. And right now that's the gubernatorial race for governor. That's the Democrats running in that race. That's Joe Cunningham, former 1st Congressional District Congressman Joe Cunningham, leading State Senator Mia McLeod at 55.6% to 30.8%. Seems like it continues to go up there for Cunningham. Also, when we look at the state superintendent of education race for the Republicans, we're looking at right there, Lisa Ellis. Sorry, that's the Democratic race for Lisa Ellis. And she's leading Burgess at 31.8% and State Representative Jerry Govan at 20%. And of course, we're looking at the Republican superintendent of education race right now. It sounds like it's advancing to a runoff with Kathy Manis at 32.7% and Ellen Weaver at 22.1%. Kind of a surprise right there for a lot of folks who were thinking Ellen Weaver was going to be leading that race. Of course, there's a runoff. There's 6 candidates in that race, so a lot of different things will be happening over the next 2 weeks until that runoff. And we're, of course, looking now at the U.S. Senate race for the Democrat who will be facing Tim Scott this fall. Catherine Fleming Bruce has 34.5% of the vote. State Representative Crystal Matthews at 34.3%, and Angela Getter at 31.3%, with 49.3% of the votes being counted. Very close. Looks like there will be a runoff right there, of course. And for the 1st Congressional District, with Nancy Mace, the incumbent, right there with about 52% of the vote, leading Katie Arrington at 46%, with 60.5% of the votes being counted. Of course, we're still waiting for a lot of numbers to come in, a lot of different counties to report, especially Beaufort County. I think that's our last one there. So a lot of things happening. I was hoping we'd have some winners declared right now, Scott, but that's not how elections work.
Last time I checked, no, until the last vote was counted.
Can you make any predictions at this point? Are you comfortable making any predictions, or is it just so close?
Many of them are so close, and while you were talking, Gibbs and I were looking at the map of what still has to come in on the Democratic primary for governor, and even though Cunningham is strongly ahead, several of the counties that have only partially reported or not reported are probably going to help Mia McLeod quite a bit. Whether or not it's enough, it's hard to say. It's a tough mountain to overcome. Right now, he has a strong enough lead, but the places that are still reporting are coming in, several of them are coming in a little bit stronger for her, but she needs them coming in a lot stronger. I think we're going to see some interesting runoffs. I think there's going to be a lot of outside money flowing in the runoff, especially for superintendent of education. And, you know, watching outside money flow into South Carolina is always a fascinating thing to see where it lands and who it's backing. And we have seen more outside money in small races this time than we have in quite a while.
Gibbs, anything you want to
add? And runoffs, you know, it's just 2 weeks, but you're obviously going to be looking at the money to see who can get the ad buys, who can get up on the air. It's not an easy thing to do in a short period of time. You also want to see what the other candidates, do they endorse people? Do they pick people? Do they say, this is, you know, hey, I'm going to tell my supporters, this is my candidate, this is who I think you should support. And then, you know, so I think all that's going to happen in a really short amount of time, and we're going to have some, we're going to have some runoffs. And again, if you've participated in that primary, you're allowed to vote in the runoff, but it'll be very, very quick with 2 weeks.
And a lot of folks right now are tweeting about Russell Fry, you know, clearing 50% of the vote, then kind of dipping back down. So, like we said, we spoke with some folks from the Fry campaign saying that he's going to probably get 52% of this vote. There might not even be a runoff for the 7th congressional district race, which would be pretty surprising. I mean, did you ever think that'd be a factor, Scott, that Russell Fry could just win this outright like that?
I got to be honest, I didn't think that Fry would win it outright. I mean, I think I knew, and most of us knew, that he was going to be ahead. He was going to get more votes. But because there were so many other folks in the race, it seemed so many other folks who were pro-Trump and so many other folks who were kind of treading some of the same ground that he was. I wasn't sure whether or not he would get to that 50% mark, and it looks like he either has or will in the next hour. So I got to admit, I thought it was going to go to a runoff with him coming in with the obvious plurality of votes, but he may have obviated it and gotten a majority.
Did you want to add something, Gibbs?
Yeah, just that you know, obviously with that particular district and the makeup, he's very likely to be the next member of Congress from the 7th congressional district, because whatever Republican wins is likely going to be the winner there. And to be able to do that with 5 candidates against an incumbent like Tom Rice, you know, Trump or no Trump, is an impressive feat.
Yeah, again, we're still waiting to confirm those numbers, waiting for the Associated Press to call that race, but we were just referencing there's some internal numbers, internal precinct tracking from the Fry campaign that shows that they will probably win this outright with 52% of the vote. Again, just some big caveat there about those numbers. But let's look at some incumbents that have already won their nominations across the state. Of course, Senator Tim Scott, U.S. Senator there, easily won nomination there. Of course, Jeff Duncan with District 3, Representative Joe Wilson, District 2, and Ralph Norman in District 5. We're still waiting to see William Timmons, I believe. Let's see if that's on the second side or not, but I think that should be coming in soon as well. Alan Wilson, our Attorney General, has also retained the nomination for the Republican nomination. It'll be going toward race there in November, and of course, I don't think he even has a Democrat opposing him. So, pretty much right on back into the office there. Representative Jim Clyburn, District 6, Mark Hammond, the Secretary of State as well. He has a challenger in November, Rosamunda Peggy Butler, who he'll be facing. This will be for his 6th term as Secretary of State. Which does not oversee our state elections. That's something that happens in other states. The Secretary of State in South Carolina oversees business and charity filings and plays a role in the lawmaking process. So some interesting things to note there, that we're not a state like that.
I believe actually his main challenger, wanted to bring that power into underneath the Secretary of State.
So interesting to see that we have the State Election Commission, which of course was at the center a lot of the back and forth over the new election integrity and early voting bill, whether lawmakers, senators should be able to confirm some of those picks and have some oversight power there too. But again, a state election commission in South Carolina oversees our state elections. Gibbs, did you want to say something?
Just say, there are out on social media again. Some networks are calling the race for Cunningham, NBC, CNN. Again, I trust AP. We're looking for our good friend Meg Kennard to see what she says at the AP and her colleagues at the AP. But things are looking really good for Joe Cunningham, and there are some folks that are starting to say he's got enough votes to be able to be declared the winner. But again, I'm not making that call. I'm just saying others have made that call. So,
when we look at some of their statewide constitutional officers, like Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom, who faces no primary or general election opposition. He, of course, is the winner there, of course. He has served as the state's top accountant since 2003, and he's a champion of fiscal restraint, accountability, and transparency in all government financial transactions. So, Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom, of course, winning his seat again. And then, of course, Treasurer Curtis Loftus was first elected in 2010 and is skating toward his 4th term this November as well. He had no Republican primary challengers either and faces no Democratic challengers. So some two other statewide races for constitutional officers. I will note that he faces Alliance Party candidate Sarah Work in November. But we are standing by right now to hear from the Joe Cunningham's campaign. He's expected to have a speech for his supporters down there in Charleston in about 10 to 15 minutes, which we'll try to bring to you live. We're staying on the air past 10 o'clock just to keep up with some of these races, see if we'll get some race calls, see if we hear from these candidates. Scott, what do you think we'll be hearing from Joe Cunningham should he win this race? What is his message going to be? We already kind of heard him on the debate stage focusing his fire towards Henry McMaster. Is it just game on at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any question that he's going to be going both barrels blazing towards Henry McMaster. He felt he was going to win this race outright. You could see when he was running in this primary, he had at least one foot in the general election with all of his commentary. It was not aimed at his primary opponents. It was aimed mostly at Henry McMaster. I think you're going to see a lot of money, a lot of ad buys, and a lot of attempts to woo moderate voters back to the Democratic Party.
What do you think we'll be hearing from Congressman Cunningham tonight, Gibbs?
I mean, I think he's going to exactly go after Henry McMaster and just talk about, make the argument that McMaster is about the past. He's about the future. Cunningham just turned 40 years old. Henry McMaster 75, and so a huge age gap there. Certainly just very, very different approaches to moving South Carolina forward. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see kind of how he lays out his vision. And I think he's going to try to convince people that he can win. He's talked a lot about being able to flip the 1st congressional district. And if he can win there, he thinks he can win in the governorship. So.
I mean, he did take a lot of moderate votes too in Congress as well. I mean, the one big one that he was getting dinged on from State Senator McLeod was that he didn't vote to raise the federal minimum wage to $15, right, to which he said a lot of businesses in Charleston of service-based industries down there, would really be reeling from that. And of course, nowadays, things are going up already. These wages are rising already. Right. So do you think that will be a big issue, or what other issues do you think we'll be seeing play out when it comes to the Democrats versus Republican incumbent McMaster?
Well, certainly abortion. I mean, I think that's going to be something, with the leaked Supreme Court case. Once the case finally drops, we're going to know exactly where the court comes down. But McMaster already has that ad where it's a good ad. He has the pen out in his hand and says, this is the only thing that stands between, a woman's right to choose and what happens in the South Carolina legislature. And so this will not be an election where it's, McLeod called Joe Cunningham Republican light, but, there'll be some very different policy positions between Joe Cunningham and Henry McMaster. Abortion will be certainly one of them, and so that will play out, and you'll see all types. Again, what the McMaster team is going to do is they're going to align Joe Cunningham as closely as possible with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren,
Nancy Pelosi.
Just make it as national as possible. And Joe Cunningham's going to say, look, I'm here in South Carolina. I'm not that type of Democrat, and here's what I want to do, and just really focus it on jobs and education and health care. I think it's going to be a pretty, a pretty kitchen table type of campaign for the Cunningham campaign.
Scott, and I think you'll be watching that in that race against Democrats versus McMaster. Big issues that we should be watching, paying attention to.
Well, I think Gibbs hit it, and he hit another important point as well. Cunningham is going to have to run against his own party somewhat. he's going to have to say, I'm not the same type of Democrat as is around the rest of the country. And so when you're running against your own party, it's less time you have to run against your opposition. And again, I think Gibbs hit the nail on the head. While McMaster's going to be pointing to his economic successes, he's going to be painting Joe Cunningham as a liberal who supports the gay agenda. I'm sure that phrase will come up somewhere. And abortion. And, it's going to be those social issues that in South Carolina, people tend to lean conservative on, that is going to be used to wet the brush to paint Joe Cunningham as a liberal who's out of touch with South Carolina, and he's going to have to push back.
And we're still waiting to hear from Congressman Cunningham down there in Charleston right now. But I want to mention this news from what I've seen online already, that NBC News and CNN both called the race for Cunningham after 9 p.m. We are waiting for the Associated Press to make their race call, which is what we trust and use, not to discredit NBC News or CNN, just saying how we use our race calls here in South Carolina, ETV. So we will be hearing from him soon. Like we said, we heard from State Senator Mia McLeod, who said it's been a hell of a run, quite the journey. Do you think that there could have been more that she could have done on the campaign trail? I mean, just from a press perspective, I don't remember getting too many press alerts that, hey, we're going to be here, we're going to be here. To be fair, I didn't get many of those from the Cunningham campaign either. I think they reached out to folks when they wanted to in certain areas. But, as a statewide media outlet, I don't remember getting too many press releases from either of them regarding, hey, come follow us on the campaign trail, reaching out, trying to get that engagement, which you need if you're especially a Democrat in this state. What do you think could have been done in this case here, Gibbs?
I mean, I think money would be the biggest thing, and being able to raise money and being able to make the ad buys, get your name on television, make sure you're in the right social media outlets, and then, just more appearances. Like I said, we had Cunningham on campus at College of Charleston. We had Mia McLeod on campus at College of Charleston. But it is, you just got to, it's all those, it's the Rotary clubs and the local county Democratic meetings and things like that that can really make a big difference. And so I think more of that would have been good. But look, I mean, this is her first time running statewide. She's relatively young. She could certainly run in future races, and a lot of times it's not that first race, but it's maybe the second or third race where you get over the hill and get in nominations. And so, a lot more people know the name Mia McLeod now than they did before this election, that's for sure.
Scott, looking at statewide Democratic campaign strategy, what do you really need to do? Like Gibbs was saying, raise that money, get that presence out there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to money. You had one candidate who didn't need to spend money in order to get name recognition in Joe Cunningham, and you had a candidate in Mia McLeod who needed to spend money in order to get name recognition, but at the same time, because she didn't have name recognition, she wasn't able to raise a lot of money. It's the classic catch-22 of politics. I mean, you want to get those mailers in the hands of the people who voted in 3 or more past primaries for your party. You know they are faithful voters. That takes money. Those glossy little things that we put in recycling almost immediately aren't going to print themselves. But in the trip from the mailbox
to the trash
into
can.
into the recycling bin.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Yes.
You tend to see a name on there, and the more, it's little things. Obviously, if you don't have the money for an ad buy, you have to have signs out there. You have to go to the Rotary clubs. You absolutely have to go to the county party meetings, and then you do that. You raise enough money, you get those ad buys, and that's how you overcome that classic catch-22.
Yeah, we're going to look at some numbers right now. Just a quick recap as we await Joe Cunningham, who, as you see right there, has 56% of the vote, with 50% of the votes being counted at this point over State Senator Mia McLeod. Again, we're saying that NBC News and CNN have already called that race for Cunningham. We're waiting on the Associated Press to make their call in this race. The state superintendent of education race is advancing to a runoff, with Kathy Manis leading Ellen Weaver at 32% to 22%. A very interesting race that we'll be seeing play out over the next 2 weeks, as we've been discussing. And in the Democratic superintendent of education race, we're looking at, not Lisa Ellis right there, 48% of the ballots winning right now, leading Gary Burgess at 31.6% and State Representative Jerry Govan at 19.9%. For the Senate race, Catherine, this is an interesting one I want to talk to you guys about really quickly. Catherine Fleming Bruce at 34.3%. We're looking at Matthews there, Crystal Matthews, State Representative Crystal Matthews at 34.1%, and then Angela Getter at 31.6%. We're talking about 3 black women here who are trying to challenge U.S. Senator Tim Scott this fall, and they're all right within each other. I mean,
basically a tie.
This is something we've never really seen before. I don't know really how this plays out, but of course we'll have a runoff, it seems like, between whoever gets the top 2 votes there. In the 1st Congressional District Republican primary, Nancy Mace, incumbent there, has 53% of the vote, leading Katie Arrington at 45%, and that's with 65% of the votes being counted. And I guess we don't have numbers from the 7th Congressional District race, but again, we've been seeing Russell Fry in that race, flirting with 50%, going over 50%. You have to have 50% plus 1 vote to win it outright in the state of South Carolina. A lot of people, including his campaign, is saying that we'll be able to do that tonight. We're going to wait and see what happens there. But a good night for Donald Trump when it comes to that race, more so than I guess what we're seeing in the 1st Congressional District race there, Scott.
Well, true. And, and his case against Tom Rice, I think, was more personal. Tom Rice actively voted to remove him from office. All that Nancy Mace did was vote to certify the election. And, he took enough umbrage with that to go against her. But that was also the bigger profile race that he may be losing on.
And that's interesting, too, when we look at that vote, because you heard a lot from Nancy Mace right after the insurrection. She was wall-to-wall TV coverage, really made her name right after that, getting so much media exposure. She was on This Week in South Carolina the day after everything happened in the Capitol, talking about her experiences, really leaning towards, you would think, voting to impeach for the incitement of the insurrection. And Tom Rice was not really anywhere, wasn't doing media after that. He did vote against certifying the election results, Gibbs. And yet he's the one that voted to impeach, and Nancy Mace said, I'm still going to stick with him.
That's right, and he's also in a district where Trump is more popular. So, he really was a vote of conscience for Tom Rice. It wasn't a good political move. It wasn't a good move that helped him electorally, but, obviously he's explained that it was the thing he felt like was the right thing to do. Nancy Mace, has more wiggle room. She's got to think about the general election. I mean, she's got to also, in addition to worrying about Katie Arrington, she's got Annie Andrews waiting for her in the general election. Yeah. And so if she was a diehard Trump supporter, never spoke out against Trump, that could make her more vulnerable in the general election. So it's very tough for a person in a swing district like Nancy Mace, who has to, make sure you cover your base to win the primary, but also make sure you're still a competitive general election candidate.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. That's really threading the needle, the 2 sides of the needle being the vote for certification and the vote to impeach, and she's trying to run that alley.
Right, that's right.
To which we heard Tom Rice saying he wished he did not vote against certifying the election results, so he wanted to vote like she did. But right now we have some breaking news with the Associated Press calling the Democratic gubernatorial race for former 1st Congressional District Congressman Joe Cunningham. A lot of F's right there, but he did win that race, it looks like, according to the Associated Press. We are waiting to hear from the congressman down in Charleston. We'll bring those remarks to you live when they happen. But again, winning that race with 5 Democrats in the race, including State Senator Mia McLeod, who has been serving up here at the State Senate for a number of years, of course. And we had that debate just days ago. It was right when the polls closed for early voting, so it was kind of an interesting time to have a debate, especially when 100,000 people had already gone to the polls. Can't really give you the breakdown of Democrats versus Republicans, but that was about 1/6 of the people that typically vote in primary elections. So hopefully some people still watch the debate, got to make up their minds, Scott. But again, it was a lot of details, a lot of policy. We didn't see too many fireworks. But folks maybe got to see minor differences between the two?
They did, and I think it was an important debate because it gave us an idea of sort of the flavor of the candidates. But as you pointed out, the early voting was over. Now think about who is most likely to watch a debate, the people who are the most passionate. And what do the most passionate do? They want to get their vote in as early as possible. So the day of voters might not have been the folks that were watching the debate, and they perhaps were the ones ones who should have been watching, or who Mia McLeod needed to be watching the debate. I do think that it was still a great exercise because it really, we thought it was going to go one way. It went completely another. It showed sides of the candidates that we were not expecting. And so for that reason alone, it was an excellent exercise and it was a well done debate, but it might have come too little too late for Mia McLeod.
And Gibbs, I know you want to jump in. I just want to let our viewers and listeners know that we have a 2-minute warning for Joe Cunningham to give his acceptance speech down there in Charleston. We'll jump to Alicia Edie in a minute, but I want to hear what you have to say, Gibbs.
Yeah, just that, you know, big night for Joe Cunningham. I mean, obviously, with 5 candidates to be able to, you know, he served 1 term in Congress, and to be able to win a statewide election, the first time running statewide, certainly an impressive feat. You know, I expect to hear a lot of criticism of Henry McMaster tonight, and a lot about, you know, obviously the normal thanks to his supporters, but a lot of focus on how he can win in November and how he can have a different result than Jamie Harrison had just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, right now, like we just said, the Associated Press has called a race for former 1st District Congressman Joe Cunningham. Right now, we have the numbers that we're looking at from SC Votes that he's at 56%. State Senator McLeod's at 30%, but we expect him to have, of course, more than 50% plus 1% to win this nomination, as AP has called. So we're waiting to hear his acceptance speech from the Music Farm down in Charleston, where Alicia Edie is, and we'll go to those remarks live when they happen. But it's interesting to see because you do have those 3 other candidates in that race that we've been talking about and how they might affect it. But total, that was about, again, 13% of that vote. Probably definitely not enough to make a difference right there in that race. So it's going to be interesting to see what we hear from Joe Cunningham, what we hear from some of these other candidates as we race towards November.
That's right, and whether they get behind Cunningham and whether they're out on the campaign trail for him, that's always something you look forward to seeing.
Especially after all the spiciness, Scott, and we saw on social media. I mean,
well,
to reconcile after last week is going to be a hill.
A lot of that was in the orbit around the candidates, you know, a little less of them going after each other. So there will be a bit of this speech where it'll be, okay, you know, we had our family squabble, it's time to come together. And so I think there will probably be 1 or 2 olive branches offered to Mia McLeod and to her supporters with the goal of bringing them back into the fold. But yeah, Gibbs is right. This is going to be all about Henry McMaster.
And we're still waiting to get results and race calls for the big races that we've been watching for Congress, talking about the 1st Congressional District with incumbent Nancy Mace being challenged by Katie Arrington. And of course, in the 7th Congressional District race with Tom Rice, the incumbent there, he's being challenged by Trump-endorsed candidate State Representative Russell Fry. And there are about 5 other candidates in that race, too, all pulling that race in different directions. But we're going to go to Joe Cunningham right now for his remarks down in Charleston. Now that he has been declared the Democratic nominee for governor in South Carolina, he will face Governor Henry McMaster this fall. The governor won outright that nomination tonight, despite having 1 challenger. And here we go to former Congressman Joe Cunningham. He's on stage. It seems like a pretty rowdy party down there in Charleston, as I can imagine.
Good evening, South Carolina. Brand new. First and foremost, I want to thank my family, my parents, who have had my back every step of the way, my 4 older brothers, who taught me how to take a punch, but more importantly, taught me how to throw a punch. I love you guys. To my son, Boone, who should be very much sound asleep right now, I hope one day you look back on this and it makes you proud. And I hope that you realize that big dreams are worth chasing, and that to remember that if you ever get knocked down, to always get back up and keep fighting. To my campaign team, thank you. To Chris Barron of the Spin Doctors, right? I mean, it means so much that he's here because, to be honest, my brothers would not have come here tonight unless he was here. To Bill Wilson and DJ T Streets, thank y'all so much. Thank you to the Music Farm for hosting us here on Tuesday evening. Appreciate it. To Senator Mia McLeod, thank you for putting yourself forward to run and for the spirited debate on the issues. And even though we were competitors, we're now on the same team. And I look forward to working with you in the months to come as we bring our state out of the past and into the future. And to Carlton Boyd, Calvin McMillan, and Cowboy Williams, thank you for running and thank you for offering yourself for service to our amazing state. And to even Governor Henry McMaster, congrats on your hard-fought primary victory tonight. But the last not least, the voters, you all. I mean, I cannot express my appreciation for the trust that you've placed in me. And I promise you, I will never, ever let you down. So, it is with great humility and honor that I accept your nomination for governor of the great state of South Carolina. Look, everyone in this room knows me. Everyone here knows me. But for the people watching at home, just allow me to introduce myself. I'm Joe Cunningham. First and foremost, I'm a dad. I'm a proud South Carolinian, an attorney, a former ocean engineer, a huge Spin Doctors fan, and most recently, I had the honor of representing the Low Country in Congress. And look, I ran for Congress in the first place because I was sick of the divisiveness. I was sick of the partisanship and the selfishness. And I saw too many politicians more concerned with keeping their job than doing their job. And almost no one was willing to work across the aisle to get things done. And after we flipped a district that Donald Trump had won by 13 points, we got to work to change Washington and change the way it operated. Our motto was low country over party. And it was more than just a slogan. It was more of our North Star and our guiding principle. And I'm so proud that I had two of my bills make it through a divided Congress and get signed into law by a Republican president. One of those bills to help our veterans. And another one of those bills, yeah, hell yeah, right? Ethan knows what's up. And another one of those called the Holy Grail of Environmental Conservation. Look, I brought the far left and the far right together to pass a bill banning offshore drilling off the coast of South Carolina. We passed a bill to close the Charleston loophole. Another bill to protect voting rights. And so much more. But I also wasn't afraid to buck my own party. I stood up to Democrats and stopped the congressional pay raise. I voted against a budget that increased the debt. And not just no, but hell no to those who wanted to defund the police. I was proud. I was incredibly proud to be ranked one of the most independent and one of the most effective members of Congress. Words that have never been used to describe our current governor. Ever. And look, a couple weeks ago I turned 40. And someone reminded me that I am now officially as old as Henry McMaster's political career. You see, Henry McMaster. Look, Henry McMaster is not just a career politician. He's a forever politician. He was working in the halls of Congress before I was even born. Like, he's run for U.S. Senate. He's run for Attorney General twice. He's run for Lieutenant Governor twice. Governor 3 times. And he was the chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party for over a decade. Henry McMaster is the oldest governor in South Carolina history. And he's running to be the longest serving governor in South Carolina history. But the question is this: does he deserve it? And look, what can we expect? What can we expect from another 4 years under his leadership? And look, while I appreciate his service and his long political career, we've got to be honest. We've got to be honest about his track record. Our schools remain at the bottom of every list. Our roads are ranked literally dead last in our country. We've been ranked the worst state for women and one of the worst states to start a family. Violent crime and murder are at an all-time high. We're losing out on major economic projects because companies, they want to relocate where there are good schools, safe roads, a healthy workforce, and leadership with a vision for the future. And right now, we don't have any of that. And Governor McMaster has shown little interest in attacking these challenges. Instead, he's focused on culture wars and national political fights that do nothing to help our state. He signed the most restrictive abortion ban in America. But now he wants to go even further and ban all abortions with no exceptions for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. He vetoed a bill to fix our roads. And while violent crime is at an all-time high in our state, the governor's solution, it was to allow more people to carry guns in public. And as we know, shootings have skyrocketed this year. He helped kill the medical marijuana bill that would have finally given relief to veterans and people suffering from epilepsy or chronic illness. He opposed my plan to temporarily suspend the gas tax to help offset the rising costs at the pump. And until a court stopped him, he wanted to send your tax dollars to private schools while at the same time underfunding our public schools and refusing to give our teachers a raise. Hey, look, folks, in South Carolina, we fire football coaches after 1 or 2 losing seasons. We do. Henry McMaster is going on 40 straight losing seasons, and he's asking for extension onto his contract. It's time for the people of South Carolina to stand up and say, "You're fired." Because Governor McMaster is the governor of the past, and I'm running to be the governor of the future. Hey, because the future of our state is bright. But only if we look ahead, not behind. And my plans as governor, they're ambitious because I think we have to be. You know, none of what I want to do is radical. It's just simply overdue. Like dramatically raising teacher pay so they are finally treated like the heroes they are, right? like legalizing marijuana and sports betting, and then using that revenue to fix our roads and our schools. Like implementing term limits for all politicians. We'll tackle the gun violence epidemic so that everyone can feel safe on the streets of their own communities. We're going to protect our environment, and we're going to turn climate change from a crisis into an economic opportunity to create good paying jobs here in South Carolina. We can and we will bring common sense change to South Carolina, and friends, we're going to do it without raising any taxes. Look, in the coming weeks, I'm going to be outlining more of my vision for our state to ensure that, that we don't continue to be left behind by our neighboring states, and to ensure that our best and that our brightest stay in South Carolina to raise their families. And to guarantee that every child in South Carolina has the opportunity at a successful life, no matter where they're born, no matter where they live, or what they look like, or who they love. Folks, look, I'm a different kind of Democrat, and I'm going to be a different kind of governor. Y'all know that. Y'all know that. My fellow South Carolinians, I'm asking you to take a chance on me. And maybe you're a Republican. Maybe you never voted for a Democrat. Maybe you don't vote at all. Maybe you're not even registered. But I want to change that. And this campaign, our campaign, is going to give you something to be excited about. It's going to give you something to be hopeful about. Something to be proud of. I want to give you something to vote for, not just something to vote against. And look, I'm going to be straight up with you. I'm going to be honest. We may not agree on everything. But as former mayor of New York City, Ed Koch, said, if you agree with me on 7 of the 10 things that I say, vote for me. If you agree on 10 out of 10 things I say, go see a psychiatrist. But I can promise you one thing. We are going to agree more than we disagree. Because I'm not interested in the division. I'm not interested in the culture wars and the wedge issues. While Governor McMaster wants to distract, deceive, and divide, I want to unite, inspire, and deliver. South Carolina is an amazing state with incredible people. And this is a state where we have chosen to spend our lives. And we are the custodians of our future. There's nothing stopping us from moving forward and making the necessary change that we all know is required. The question is, this is the question, whether we are able to break out of our partisan corners, treat each other like human beings, and focus on the things that really matter, like our kids. My 4-year-old son, Boone, he's my world. He's everything. And I will work with anyone, anywhere, anytime to build a better future for him and his whole generation. And I know you're the same with your kids. Henry Ford once said, if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. South Carolina, it's time for us to move forward together. To turn the page on the past and write a new chapter for our state. Let's grab that pen together and go make history. Go to joeforsouthcarolina.com. Join our team. Thank you, and may God continue to bless the great state of South Carolina. Thank you all so much.
All right, that was That was Joe Cunningham right there. He's the Democratic gubernatorial nominee. Very excited Joe Cunningham, we want to add. Very spirited Joe Cunningham right there in that speech that he gave. Of course, thanking one of his top challengers, State Senator Mia McLeod, who said it was quite the run that she had. And we have some updated congressional district numbers, too, that we're going to show you right here for the 1st Congressional District with Nancy Mace and Katie Arrington. We're still waiting a lot of Beaufort numbers to come in, but right now what we have is Nancy Mace, the incumbent, at 53.3%, and Katie Arrington at 45%. I want to bring up just a tweet that I saw from CBS News talking about how they did see some Beaufort County numbers coming in, and it seems like it's padding Mace's lead over Arrington. We're still waiting to see those numbers come in. I also saw a tweet from the State Election Commission that said Beaufort County results are delayed until all precincts report. They're not doing partial reports. We're going to have to wait until all of Beaufort County reports to get those numbers updated. So a big county that we're waiting on in the 1st Congressional District that will make a difference there. And of course, the 7th Congressional District race between State Representative Russell Fry, who is at 50%, and incumbent Tom Rice, who is at 24.8%. Another update I want to give you on that race, according to Decision Desk HQ, they're projecting Russell Fry is the winner of the Republican nomination for that race, unseating incumbent Tom Rice. That's their race call. That's Decision Desk HQ. We're not going to make any race calls until we hear from the Associated Press on this race. But if that's the case, that's pretty big, like we've been talking about, guys, as we wrap up here, looking at those big races to see State Representative Russell Fry really just, taking out an incumbent like that, Tom Rice. What do you think, Scott?
Well, and not only that, as Gibbs pointed out earlier, he's really got a pretty smooth road into Congress. So this was a bit of a surprise. Everybody knew that he was coming in and was going to get more votes than Tom Rice. I don't think anybody except his ardent supporters thought that he could do it without a runoff, and that's exactly what he did. And that just shows that, when Trump's final line, you voted to remove me, he went in, he had his gatherings in that district. They paid off for Russell Fry.
It's a long march to this point, Gibbs, the 7th Congressional District.
It really is, but it's being played out across the country. This, where Donald Trump has gotten involved in a number of races. He doesn't have a perfect record. It looks like he's going to have a 500 record. He's 1-1 in South Carolina, but a big win for Donald Trump in the 7th Congressional District.
Gotcha. I think we're going to just wrap it up right there. I know Nancy Mace may be taking the podium soon, but again, we're still waiting on a lot of results to come in from Beaufort County. I just want to read this one tweet from State Senator Mia McLeod, who was running against Joe Cunningham. She says, "I'm so proud of each and every one of you who supported this campaign and gave your time, your money, and your vote to fight for change. It was an honor to stand with you and have you standing with me. We made history with this campaign, but more importantly, we opened the doors to a future of possibilities." Again, first black woman right there running for a Democratic nomination for governor. She did not secure that, Joe Cunningham did, but Mia McLeod will still be in the state Senate, still be doing some policy lawmaking right there. But right now, that's where we're going to leave it at this point. We're still watching a lot of races, which you can follow along on scvotes.org. And of course, on southcarolinapublicradio.org and SCETV.org. We'll be updating those as well. And on my Twitter, at Gavin Jackson. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us in studio tonight, Gibbs Knotts and Scott Huffmon. And thanks to Talisha Edie and Victoria Hansen in the field. And for everyone at South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio, thanks for tuning in, and good night.